My guest today is Usha Ramanathan, one of India's most respected legal scholars. Usha has spent nearly 4 decades working on the jurisprudence of law and poverty, working on concerns like the Bhopal gas survivors, the Narmada Valley displacements, the criminalisation of beggary, and most recently on Aadhaar, which she has been the most persistent critic of since its launch in 2009. If you've listened to this show before, you'll know that most of my guests come from a broadly libertarian, market-oriented, classical liberal background. Usha does not. Her worldview is that the Indian state, across colonial rule, the Congress years and the BJP years, has not merely failed the poor, but systematically constructed them as illegal subjects, encroachers, beggars, vagrants, and defaulters. And what we call development too often means transferring value from tribal and rural populations to urban elites. In this conversation, I try to wear the hat of my previous guests, a free market, libertarian type, and push back on her worldview. This conversation is one that I've been meaning to have for a long time, and is also one of my favorite recordings to date. As always, I hope you enjoy listening to us disagree. Hi Usha, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I'm really excited to have you here because traditionally most of my guests who I've brought on the podcast are very classic liberal/libertarian leaning guests. And I think as a consequence of my first set of guests were from that worldview. And then they introduced me to a few other people in their lives who are from that worldview. And I ended up meeting a lot of those people and inviting them on the podcast. And there is a paucity in the types of things that they care about. That is 100% true.
Sure.
So the conversation will be very academic. It will focus on questions of liberty, the construction of the state, those sorts of things. But very rarely is it anthropological, is it about actual history or about discrimination. These sorts of subjects rarely come up in those topics. And so I had spent a lot of time asking around saying would love to have a guest on who cares more about these subjects than any of my previous guests have. Mm-hmm. And somebody that I know who knows you really well said Usha is the person to go to. And then we spoke and I really felt like it was a fantastic conversation because it opened up my mind to a bunch of questions.
Okay.
Now, chief among, when we started, usually with every guest that I have a conversation with, I start off by asking, what has occupied your thinking, right? So that I can understand where you are and then see if there's anything that I can do to disagree with something that you're already thinking about. And with almost no hesitation, you said that I'm thinking a lot about the question of poverty.
Right.
And by extension, the poor, right? And you said something like our treatment of the poor, right? It could be us as people, some sort of systemic treatment of the poor, and then the state's treatment of the poor. I want to bring all the listeners also to where we are so that it's easy for them to join us for the rest of the conversation. It seems so heartless to ask this question, right? Because what I want to ask is why care about the poor?
Right.
But more, if I had to be a little bit more detailed about it, why do you care about the poor? Or what is the heart of the concern for questions like poverty or poor? Where does this come from?
Let me start saying this, that if I use the term the poor, I made a mistake in the sense, this is, when you say the poor, it becomes like a status. It becomes like a category. But they are a community and they are part of a wider community. So it is not really, very often we think about them as about people who've been impoverished, people who are unable to get out of conditions of poverty, people who are suffering the effects of poverty. So poverty is the common thing to all of this. And, we found that it's not just in the context of poverty, but in almost anything. For instance, even within poverty, we say beggary and we say beggars. But actually, there are just people who beg.
Yeah.
And when we say, beggars, we forget that there are people behind it. It's the same thing that we say with criminals. There's hardly anyone that I know. And in fact, I can't think of anybody who's just a criminal. They're people who commit crime. So I think in every word, if we put the people into it, it changes the way we think about it. We then don't think about it as something that is happening, but that something is happening to people.
Yeah.
That should change the way we think. I actually come from a time, my growing up happened in the 60s. That's meaning like I started growing up in the 60s, which means when I turned 7, 8, 15, and then you keep growing, at least chronologically.
Yeah.
And you find that as you, from that time, that's a very interesting time because, India had become independent. We were trying to be self-sufficient. There was a lot of things in the nature of development going on. Different kinds of people needed to be acknowledged, to be recognized, and for the state to be able to deal with them. The state didn't have it's a huge ability you need. So during that time, you find that the idea was that you make a large enough pie and it'll trickle down to people. Now it's, we know it doesn't happen. People don't let it trickle down. And I think it's that which really started me off in one sense, that everything seemed to stop somewhere. And it never went to people who had not been able to reach that point already. In our country, it's also complicated by questions of caste, for instance. It's complicated by questions of landlessness, about the idea of a peasantry that does work but has nothing. So as you grow up, you find that all these things, little by little, and then you notice small things that you do, like you'll have somebody coming to your house to wash your dishes. You never wash your dishes. You just put it there and you go away. They wash it and they leave, and then somebody else goes, sprinkles water on it and brings it into the house. And it takes a long time. It took me a while to grow up to see how bad that was.
Yeah.
What were we doing to ourselves when we were being people like that? And in the 70s is when sociology became like quite a discipline. It began to grow as a discipline in India. We didn't have very much Indian literature at that time. Very little literature even from outside. You had a Margaret Mead and an M.N. Srinivasan. That's all we learnt about. But it was also a time when social work was becoming a big thing. I didn't do social work. I did sociology. But we were encouraged to go out into places that we would otherwise, families protect people from going to those places. We never enter a cheri or a slum. You hardly ever go to a village. I think whole generations of city dwellers have grown up without ever having been to a village except as a resort.
Yeah.
So in this, they push you to go there. And through the 3 years of sociology, as I watched all of this and saw, at that time, you could recognize that somebody was in a condition of poverty because, in a manner of speaking, but almost literally, their stomach would be touching their spine. And it would hurt to see that. It would hurt in the sense that you kept feeling you had to avert your eyes because seeing it there's something wrong with it. But as a young person, I didn't know what it was that was wrong. I just knew that it was terribly wrong. And I thought after that, law would produce the solutions for it. I was to learn that law doesn't do anything of the kind, that it actually very often exacerbates the problem. And because it's all around you and you learn how not to see it, seeing it became the first most important thing.
Yeah. On your point of seeing it, last night I was in a car on the way to some sort of a social event when I looked out of the window as we were going under a flyover here in Delhi, and there were so many young men and women with their children living under the flyover. These are kids playing, little mats laid out where they are sleeping. Entire lives lived under that particular flyover. And I'm sure that in all the years, in all the cars I've taken trips into all the different places, every flyover I've passed under has had somebody living there because they do not have somewhere else to live. And that question of, and this is urban poverty, but poverty in general, truly I have to acknowledge that is something that was never top of my mind. Like I would just say that, okay, there are people there and there are people here and they live different lives than I live. And I think so much time is spent looking ahead. Like I'm thinking about all the things I would like to do tomorrow and the day after and the years after that, that I'm not really looking around me at other people. And so I felt very personally affected after our conversation and spent a lot of time, reflecting on whether the people around me should care more about this. When you said that the law didn't adequately respond to this as a problem, and I want to try and break this down, right? Okay, so if we think about when you said their stomach touches their spine, that's a function of hunger. That is the simple absence of food. There's nothing to eat and no way to buy it, even if you wanted to. But then the poverty umbrella is much larger. It could be the lack of housing. It could be the lack of meaningful, gainful employment. There are so many other ways to look at this, right? Do you have some method of categorization? Because if we have to come back to the question of the law and say the law has to maybe think about resolving something, which itself is a question. Is this a problem for the law to solve? Is one question. But assuming that it is, the way that we define what is and then isn't poverty does matter. So how do you think about that broadly? Is it particularly, and is it self-reported? That is, do people say, I feel poor and hence I'm poor? Is it $1 a day, those sorts of numerical measures? How do we go about categorizing what we think falls under this umbrella?
Before I get to it, let me just say one thing. I think one of the reasons that we many of us grow up without really acknowledging the problems that poverty brings is because I think for many of us who've been able to escape it altogether and who live in a place where it is unlikely to visit us, we are unlikely to be in that condition of poverty. The classic thing where they'll say, there, but for the grace of whatever I believe in, go I. We don't have that sense. That is true about poverty. That's true about caste. And so if we don't think it can happen to us, it stops being something that we worry about because we feel we have enough to worry about. So that's just a kind of preliminary remark to what I will start saying. To say why maybe some of the ways in which we've looked at poverty has developed the way it has. So one sure factor is, economics has come to dominate our lives over decades now. And I think that's one big tragedy. Because economics has decided what we will assume and what we will actually want to know. So I remember being at a conference on law and economics, and the economists kept telling us, but if we assume this and we assume that, and I was like, you can't assume it because it's not true. You have to go out there and see if it's true or not. If we assume, for instance, that people who are getting displaced with the Narmada Dam are going to have a better life because they're actually going to get out of the kind of place they were in, which is like some back of beyond place, and they're going to come out into civilization and the mainstream is better. Actually, by now we know that it's not. So how do we assume that it would be better for them to come out and then... So that's one kind of thing. And the other is that I suppose such a... for the state to act, it felt that it needed some kind of, some kind of way of assessing it. So they brought in this poverty line idea. But it can't be the only kind of thing that you use to understand what poverty means, to understand how many people are actually, and how we are creating not just people below the poverty line. The idea that we have below poverty line and above poverty line as a criterion, it should tell us something. So it's all, it helps us in terms of giving us meaning to language. But the thing is, we've kind of emptied it of meaning and we just say BPL, APL like it doesn't mean anything. But I think the good thing in the first decades, was that administrators, bureaucrats were expected to be on the ground. The collector was a very important person because the collector was the guy who would be there on the ground and would give a feedback to the state on what is actually happening with people.
Right.
And we've seen that over a period of time, the anxiety to move, the anxiety to get closer to the centers of power has been far greater than the anxiety, than the excitement about doing something that actually changes people's lives. So I think the dependence on a bureaucrat, there have been extraordinary bureaucrats who've, done all they can, but it shouldn't be, when they become the exception, then we know that there's a problem. The other thing is that, we've filled our lives up with so much that we are not creating any other ways of understanding. In fact, we had about 10 years ago, we had a meeting where we said, it was on law and poverty. And we said, okay, those who are 20 and those who are 40 and those who are 60, if each of you will tell us how you recognize poverty. When you see something, how do you know that poverty exists there? It was actually tragic to see that nobody had any idea. Nobody had any idea. You had people across ages. And at the end of it, they said, we really need to think about this. And I'm thinking, we've had how many, 50, 60 years of being a country on our own, and we haven't thought about this. It should tell us something about ourselves, not just about poverty, no?
Yeah.
So in terms of assessment of what, how, where, you have to get out and be among people, because it is not just, poverty is again not just one condition. It's a set of conditions, like you said. And when, the other part which has emerged even more, it's become more prominent now, is the idea of precarity. I have something today, but I don't know if I'll have it tomorrow. The way, for instance, employment has gone in this country, people are constantly precarious. You walk into, how many times have we gone to places where people are waiting at road corners hoping that some truck will come and pick them up and give them work for that day.
Yeah.
How many young people spend days and months? Now, that's not just about unemployment. It's not about underemployment. It's about precarity. And precarity is just a touch away from poverty, from you sinking into a condition of poverty. Just think about what that means, no?
Absolutely. Kumar Anand, who was on the podcast as well, spent a month with Mohit Satyanand going through Bihar. And what they said was most striking to them was just the sheer number of people standing around. How frequently they would go into cities and towns and see young men, mostly young men, because it's not like young women are even coming out to enter the workplace, just standing around because there is not anything specific to do. This is true. Okay, so I want to pick up on the Narmada Dam example that you gave me, right? And this, I think, goes back to my question of how do we draw a boundary around what is poverty. Somebody may tell you that, Usha, the lives that we will give the tribals living around the dam, if we move them to more urban areas, will be significantly better on a measure of, for example, per capita GDP. Right? They will earn more money. They will have a formalized income. They will work in the formal sector. They will have a job, a minimum wage, and I would suspect for most people who live in that part of the country, they are saying, I don't want that. For me, the measure of success is not even that. I love my way of life. I love where I live. I love the people I live with. To be part of the forest is important to me. This is just what it means for me to live a rich and fulfilling life. And this economic, like you said, measure that you have concocted that shows that welfare is a consequence of per capita GDP is something I'm not buying into. Now the question becomes, for somebody like you, then how do you measure who is poor? Because you could say self-reported poverty. You could say that somebody who claims to be poor is poor. But maybe, it's very hard to build public policy on self-reported measures, right?
Sure.
But also this inherent sense of living a fulfilled life and having enough and knowing that I feel content is a very personal feeling, right? So then maybe it's not a measure of that economic number. Are these good ways for me to poke at you? Because I'm trying to understand that, here's an explicit example of us being able to provide, quote unquote, a better life for somebody who explicitly says, no, I don't want that. I'm actually comfortable where I am. Please don't come and build a dam here. That's all I'm asking for.
So there are actually two separate things in this. One is when we displace people and when we say that their lives are going to get displaced and we are taking them to a place which will be better for them, the displacement they know is happening. But what that better life will be, they don't really know. And the extent of engagement you need to have for people to feel that they can actually move and that they will actually be in a better place, that engagement takes time. You have to build confidence. And that confidence is not just about, unfortunately, confidence is also the first word which comes before trickster. So it's not like we want to con people just to move out of that place. If they feel that that's what they want, then if they're convinced that that's the kind of life that they want and you're actually able to give it to them, maybe there'll be some people who'll be willing to move. But actually what we also see in that is that we have devalued a certain way of living, which is why we think that that's not important enough. It's okay if that goes, you come and live where we are. Systems are not working in a way. The whole state system is not working in a way where people who are displaced like that are anything other than victims of development. And, one thing we know in victimology is that once a person becomes a victim, they are seen as a burden on the system. Nobody really has any sympathy with them. So this idea that, there is this world there which you are missing and I'm going to take you to that world is only a promise. It's always only been a promise. And it may not be a promise that is enticing to somebody. The question is, how far will we go when we say that we need to develop? In the 50s and 60s, I have full sympathy with the kind of things that were planned then, whether it was dams or big industry or whatever, because the country needed to become self-sufficient. And you didn't have the luxury of time to sit and figure out, what I can do. But you needed to take responsibility for the effects of it. And you needed to learn lessons from it. Unfortunately, I don't see that either has happened. And we've seen very often there is this language of somebody has to make the sacrifice. And it's a remarkable thing that the people who have the least are asked to make the most sacrifice. Let's just think about what the development model has been, where in the early 1990s, we find that while the tribal population in this country is about 8 to 9%, the number of the percentage of tribals who've been displaced is about 60%. Of those who've been displaced, 60% are tribals.
Yeah.
So we just shouldn't be seeing this as if it is a, neutral kind of statement. It's not. The second thing is that we are telling them, okay, you can go to the cities. There is very much more there. Move. But we do know how over the years people in cities have been treated. We've had the largest number of demolitions since the late 90s, and which means that people are being dehoused without being rehoused. And we had, for instance, a judgment of a Delhi High Court in 2002 where the judge was impatient with this idea of resettling people. And they said, these are people who, if you're going to resettle them at the rate at which we are resettling them, it will take 272 years to resettle them. So just demolish. And if you don't demolish, the bureaucrat in whose territory the demolition has not happened and you continue to have juggies, we will punish them. So when courts start seeing things like this, and the idea of justice, the idea of equity kind of takes, it takes 15th place after pragmatism. And that is the pragmatism of those who already have. Then we are talking about something different. I don't think it's just about measuring. It is about understanding. And understanding is not just a state issue. Understanding is an issue for all of us. Because as long as those who have the power to make a difference with the state, as long as they don't show that they are noticing what is happening around them, the state is going to feel impelled only to answer those who it has been serving all along. And the difficulty also is that law is made. When I thought that law would provide an answer, I didn't realize that law would actually make it more difficult for persons in poverty, because it's not just the condition of poverty that is imposed on people. It is also illegality. Illegality goes hand in hand with being poor. So, this that we make laws that will make people who are already vulnerable, teeter on the brink all the time is something that I think we really need to set right.
Yeah.
It's not just unfair. I mean, what are we as people if that's what we think is okay,
Yeah, I think that point 2 on the legality front deserves its own 30 minutes. But maybe now I'm going to open the disagreement door, right? On the first point, what I'm not getting is why you're not saying something like, if even one person among the tribal community wants to continue to live the way that they currently live, no degree of government development project, whether in the 50s or 60s or today, is permissible. That is, we're saying something like, these are whole persons who have their own rights that you nor I nor the state can encroach upon. And that is the institution of the state. The state's job is to defend rights, not encroach on it. And so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if a dam is so necessary that an entire city will get water. Even one house, even one tribe should not be displaced, however well that displacement may be managed. Now, if the state were to, like any other private player, approach each of them individually and say, look, here's the compensation package that we have. Do you meaningfully consent? If you meaningfully consent, then you can leave. Then we'll take the land. That's a private party transaction. But broadly, I'm arguing for property rights, that these tribals as a group own that space. It's their land, and the state does not own it. It doesn't fall under this ambit of state property or public property. And so any action is viewed as encroachment. That is, your sympathy for development projects, I feel is the first thing I want to question. Right? Why should we have any sympathy for that? What we want at all times is to respect the rights of individuals, whether in cities, urban centers or villages or in tribal regions.
So first, let me clarify. My sympathy was not for the development projects. My sympathy for the state was for the state which thought that it needed these kind of development projects so that they could become self-sustaining.
Oh, the early naivety.
Yeah. Like you in the 50s, in about 55, 56, there is this image of Nehru going to Calcutta. And I think Bharat Seva Sadan or somebody takes him around all the juggies and shows him how people are living in cities. And they're all, it's like, crowded, it is, unhygienic. And Nehru sees it and is like horrified. Then the question is, what do you do about it? So then they come back, and then there is this law that gets made. And it's a law on slum areas, Clearance and Improvement in Clearance Act. So they bring in this law, which is for clearance and improvement. So you can either clear the place, or if you can improve it, otherwise clear it. You should see the debate that happened in Parliament. it's a time where they were not discarding people as irrelevant, which is what we see happening increasingly, that, you fall on your own devices, you decide what you want to do.
Yeah.
So at that time, they were not doing that. But it's completely confused and messed up because you don't know whether your problem is that you have such slums in the city or that people are living like this in the slums. And then what do you do about it? So the power that got given, however, was to the state to decide whether it wants to improve or to clear. And that power has been used over the years. And especially from the 70s, you find, by which time the romance of being a new country had fallen off, and there was a, grabbing of resources happening in all kinds of ways. You find that it just landed up with people getting, for slum dwellings getting cleared. There was a judgment in the Madras High Court, and Justice Chandru, who's well known for his social causes, as a lawyer, he had taken it to the court, and in the process they found that over 30% of the people in the city occupy 6% of the land, and you want to demolish that because you say, I don't like to see this here. So it's only recognizing factors which are unconnected with how people live. So to go back to your question about development and whether even one person should matter, I actually think till the last person, everybody matters. But I also understand that there are imperatives of the state, and many people not in the development sector, but in the sector that is questioning this model of development, have been saying, if you really want to do that, you have to take people along with you. If they are not convinced, don't do it. And you find that these decisions are made on the basis that, okay, these are people who we can deal with. One, they may not have any legal, and they may not have pattas and whatever. The second is that they won't be able to fight the state. So you don't go to places where people might have the wherewithal to fight the state.
Yeah.
This is not a neutral decision that gets made. It's a pragmatic decision that gets made. So you have people who have being protected and people who don't have being demolished and being, displaced all the time. So that's an inequity that has grown over the years. See, these are practices of the state. Those practices become habits. And after some time, many people stop seeing that there is anything to even question about it. Just the notion of development, for instance. So it took, we had a 1894 Act on the Land Acquisition Act. It continued, those were colonial dreams and ambitions of what development was, of what could be called a public purpose, because the public at that time was the state and the colonial state. We continued that law till 2013. And it changed in 2013 because people started battling it, saying, what are you doing to your own people? You say development, you have all these massive projects coming in, and then you just discard all these people because under the Land Acquisition Act, only owners of land will get some compensation, and even that will result in impoverishment. But that's still, you're forgetting about all those who are getting affected by the projects but don't really own anything. Which brings me to your question about ownership. I don't think many communities see their access to resources as related to ownership. It's something that is being imposed on them now. Even in the Forest Rights Act, the only way the forest, people living in forests and dependent on forests have been able to keep anything for themselves is in allowing for a language to enter which the state understands, which is ownership. It's not about property rights. It's very unfortunate that, too many people in the liberal space, you'll find a lot of people making a big deal of ownership of property. If you look at how people live in other, in other kinds of places, they're talking about access to rights. There was a very interesting study that was done by Jan Swasthya Kendra in Chhattisgarh, where they looked at, what are all the kind of resources that there are around. Why? Because we've often wondered, you'll find people dying of starvation in various kinds of places, but in tribal areas, they'll somehow survive. It'll be marginal, but they somehow survive. And then you find that tribals are not rooted to any particular plot of land, any particular job.
Yeah.
When the access is open, then it's not fenced in. Then they go seeking that which will sustain them. If you close that access, the fencing of the forest is one of those things that the British did very well, and we seem to have adopted that very comfortably. We fence everything off. Then people can't rely on themselves and their own genius and nature around them to help them survive. So we do many things so ownership brings in all this. And I think it is important to remember the state is not an owner of anything at all. The state forgets that much too often. It says, this is mine, that's mine, and I will decide what will be done in it. The state is just holding in, it's a custodian. It's not an owner. So the idea that if somebody owns it, the state will have to buy it from them to include it in the project, and all the rest belongs to the state is so misplaced, especially when you think that most people in this country are people who don't have ownership of things, almost nothing.
Yeah. Let's spend some time on this, okay? Because
Sure.
This is, I think, going to be important for the rest of the podcast. The Indian project is massive. I mean, at least the bringing about of this country's independence was multiple princely states, the caste question, the religion question, the partition with Pakistan. A bunch of parallel, balls had to be juggled to be able to ultimately have a stable single jurisdiction democracy.
Correct.
Now, in that process, many different philosophical approaches to the world had to be brought into a single constitution, and we all have to attempt to live together. Which is not a necessity. It's okay for us to also not live together. It's also okay for us to say that some parts of this country are not part of the Indian state, they're part of their own state, right? Any of those possible outcomes are fine. But presently the way we've structured things is that we're all part of a similar jurisdiction. Now, let's say, for example, I grant the claim that truly tribals don't understand have never thought about the world through this conception of rights. And they simply access the forest around them, or the water bodies, or just the general property around. I'm so used to using the word property. The general region around them is something that they're simply accessing, right? This will frequently run up against somebody else's claims. Could be a second tribal group within the same property, right? The same physical jurisdiction. At which point, these two groups may attempt to mediate a solution to some sort of access question. The economisty language around this would be something like, because resources are scarce. That's usually why we drive the idea of property rights, because if there are scarce resources and which you said, for example, that they will somehow get by, but the somehow getting by is on the precarious edge of not getting by. And so it's possible for there to be a bad monsoon, and then suddenly there's just not enough food to go around, and we suddenly have to ask the question, who gets this particular plot of land and the food associated with it. And for generations, they have mediated this among themselves. They have solved this among themselves. However, maybe they have solved it through meaningfully illiberal means, which could be I raid, I kill, I plunder, I steal, right? And the Indian state, for all its flaws, generally has the notion of justice being common law, right? Like the idea is that if somebody, and maybe I will not even talk about physical property, I'll talk about bodily autonomy, right? That if I tell you that you cannot chop off my arm, then you simply cannot chop off my arm. The chopping off of my arm is in this domain of immoral things. It meets the definition of evil at this point, because my body is mine and your body is yours, and we cannot do unto each other something that we don't consent to. Now, it's possible that lots of tribal groups live in this way, that they don't generally think about the world like this. They don't think about your body as yours and my body as mine, and us having separate, entities. They may be okay with, children getting married and having sex at a very early age. They may be okay with, murder as part of preserving the honor of my tribe. They may be okay with lots of practices. But I can see the state's point of view, that they feel compelled to bring some sort of this unifying philosophy to this land, to say that, look, in attempting to bring together all these people, I'm also going to bring to the tribals, or explain to the tribals what we think is a philosophical problem with the way that they are living, right? Now, this is the statist position. How would you push back? That is, are you actually okay with tribals saying that, look, we mediate our disagreements in our own way? Many of these may be deeply illiberal, and that's not your problem to deal with, right? It's simply our problem to deal with.
Okay. Actually, first of all, I find it very uncomfortable, slotting people like this.
Uh-huh.
There are tribal groups with certain tribal identities. And the idea that they have no notion of rights, that, the state actually has a notion of justice, all these are extremely uncomfortable to me, because that's not what I've seen.
I just want to offer a clarifying. I'm not saying they don't have a notion of justice. I'm saying they have a different notion of justice.
Sure.
Right?
So, actually, and this has come up as a question many times among people who are concerned about, who worked on human rights, who worked on all of it. For instance, in the 80s, there was a case that was taken to the Supreme Court saying, in the Ho tribes, they have a practice where after the death of the husband, the wife has a life estate to the property, if there is any land, which it doesn't have to be in the nature of ownership property, but what you use. So that will pass on to the wife. And after her death, to her husband's families. And they were saying that, it happens that the husband's family is they kind of want to get the land fast, and therefore they accuse the woman of being a witch, and they kill her. Now this was taken to the Supreme Court. And actually, among a lot of us, we had discussions about this because we were disturbed at thinking that the Supreme Court, which has no clue, they've never been to a tribal area, they've never met the tribals, they don't know, there is this, you used to see these old films where tribals are with these spears and hookah, you'll go, that's all the notion you have of who a tribal is. That they can actually produce that equity and, produce protection and whatever, when they don't even understand who they are dealing with. So, and I remember when Nandita Haksar, who's also done a lot of work on all of this, writing a piece saying that if you really care about, something being unfair in the tribal areas, go and engage with them. Why do you treat people as if why do you infantilize people? Why do you think that you have to take something and impose it on them for them to understand anything at all? And if you put your notion of equality there, remember what you are doing with your own notion of equality in your own space. All of us are struggling, those of us who care to struggle, are struggling that equality hasn't reached us. So where are we thinking that we have the superior idea of equality? So that's the problem with the idea of the state. See, the state today, and it's a fascinating concept that, it's a thing that I got from reading James Scott, where he talks, the book that I'm referring to, the book that I'm referring to is The Art of Not Being Governed. And reading that, I realized that, after this creation of states, earlier it was like, people will invade, they'll come, they'll expand their empire, the empire will get shrunk, somebody else will come and combat the empire. And then after the Second World War, at least, you can clearly say that almost all of the world has been divided into states. And here you can actually see, in India, you can actually see what that means, where a parliament can enact laws which will apply to everybody in the country, even people they don't know, and even people they don't know exist. So it blew my mind to think that, you actually are making law for people whose existence you don't know about, whose possibilities and problems you know nothing about, but you think you can make law for everybody. There is an arrogance to this which cannot produce justice. And when you have the withdrawal of the state from many areas, but you have the expansion of state law to every place, you know that can't produce justice. So I actually question this idea that the state is capable of producing justice where there might be all kinds of injustices. It's something we grapple with all the time. We say, when you have panchayats, how much should everything be left there? And then, not just Nadita, many others have said that if you really want to do something about it, you have to be there working with them. You can't do it through an imposition and through penalties and punishments, and no human society should be asked to work like that.
No, I know.
And the less you're able to resist the state, the more anything may be imposed on you. Just, I'll give you one thing. In 2008, prior to 2008, certain tribal communities were considered, they were classified as primitive tribal groups. Then across the world, everyone felt that primitive is being treated pejoratively, which I think is a tragedy because, to me at least, primitive means that your immediate contact with the things resources you live with. You know where to go, you know how to use it, you care about the resource. We've all become so far away from it that we have no clue how to care about the resources that is taking care of us. So anyway, they changed that term to particularly vulnerable tribal groups in India. What do you think they were particularly vulnerable to? They were fundamentally particularly vulnerable to the project of development. So I think we do need to put on a different lens if we really want to look for equity and justice. And, this idea that the mainstream knows better and therefore it can intrude into anybody's lives, this has caused a whole host of problems, and we are destroying lifestyles from which we have so much to learn. And we don't think we have anything to learn anymore. We think we are just, we've reached some kind of a pinnacle, and from there we're just going to be distributing our gyan to everybody. It's not true. And I think we really need to ask ourselves that, because we are imposing it on people who may be economically, by our logic, poor, but who have managed their lives in ways which are far more equitable than our lives are.
Yeah, I find myself actually... the hat I'm wearing right now is like a classic liberal hat, right? I'm just trying to view this through that lens. I find myself, or a person like this, would partially agree and partially disagree with almost everything that you're saying. So, on the point around whether somebody sitting in Delhi should be able to pass some sort of uniform set of laws that people they have not met, or more poignantly what you said is they don't even know exist, are bound by that law. And given the format, I want to try and actually defend this, that this is a meaningful way. It's a question of what is a liberal state, right? And so to go backwards at this, if we start with the question of why should you have a state, then we may say something like, absent a state, what we have is an anarchy. We don't have any sort of single authority that has jurisdiction over the Max Weberian definition for a state is an entity that has the monopoly of violence over a given territory, right? They have the maximum ability to be violent in that space.
We add to that and the power to make law for everybody.
Absolutely, yeah. And the power to make law for
control
everybody.
all forms of violence.
Correct, yeah. And so if we don't have a state, then we have the anarchist setup, which I'm happy to get into as to should we prefer that or not. But if we have a state, then the new question becomes, what is the best kind of state that can exist? And everything that you mentioned leading up to the Second World War, to me, are deeply illiberal, to me as a person who's wearing the classic liberal hat, deeply illiberal problematic states from this philosophical worldview. Because there you simply have a peasantry who have no choice.
I'm not in defense of that at all.
Absolutely.
I was just making it as a statement. To distinguish it from what came after the second.
Yeah.
I mean, what we know definitely exists now. I'm not saying it didn't exist before. Historically, we'll find the formation of states at different point in time and whatever. But I'm talking about the kind of state creation we did after that. And decolonization.
Compared to anything we have today, like even the Indian state with all its flaws, almost every type of monarchical system that we had prior pales, it's just terrible in comparison, right? Now, the liberal state, which is maybe our best ability to create, best way to constitute a state, has this problem. And the problem is that we have to have an other. The other is somebody who's illiberal, right? So back to my original example, if you come back and you say that I want to chop off your arm, at that point the state will either put a policeman between you and me and say you can't do that, or in case you do chop off my arm, figure out some way to deliver justice to this wrong that has taken place. And that's what the state is. Like we're saying that ultimately what you are, because if I then go back and ask what is the liberal idea, what is the state defending? The liberal idea is that claim that you are a separate person and I'm a separate person, and the level at which morality rests is at the individual level. I feel pain, you feel pain. But a group of people may not be able to feel pain because a group has no brain. Each individual in that group may feel pain. And so we boil down this moral thinking to the level of the individual, which is why if a Hindu kills a Muslim, it's not like the Muslim can kill another Hindu in retribution. It doesn't make any sense because that group identity doesn't transfer. The moral blame doesn't transfer, right? This is the deeply liberal idea. And it starts with the ownership of the self, my right to my body, these sorts of things. Now the question is, imagine a state now that sits down and says, okay, let's attempt to build some sort of rule of law, structure. Has to answer the question, are we willing to accept people living in illiberal ways if they quote unquote consent to this, right? Whatever that means. But that consent is happening in groups. So, in fact, in the note I wrote to you, I was thinking about the Sentinelese in Andaman because that's so separated from the Indian subcontinent that they live separately. And imagine tomorrow we were to find out that on this island women are raped, and it happens routinely, right? Does the state have the moral obligation to prevent this from happening? At this point, we've already made the moral claim that this is not moral. We're saying this is evil. We're saying in the constitution of what it means to be a liberal state, this is not allowed. Then by definition, that's what the state does. The state says that this is illiberal behavior, and we are stepping in to prevent this from happening. Whether you may all claim to consent is not relevant to me. And in that way, they become illiberal. I understand that. But that is the exertion of the monopoly of violence. So I'm following a train of logic. Yeah. I'm saying we can't have anarchy, we must have a state. If we must have a state, we need to have the best kind of state. The best kind of state is a liberal state. Liberal state has liberal values, which then have to be imposed on those who are clearly illiberal. Because it is so possible that there's a woman on that island who does not want to be raped, but who has no choice because of the circumstance surrounding her. And if the Indian state were to intervene, it would be for her benefit, her behalf. Now, where is the break in this chain?
where do I begin?
Yeah.
You've asked a very long question.
No, please. Yeah, go
and I'm
on.
not sure I have all the links, but let me start somewhere. See, the first thing is that as I understood what the liberal was saying, the liberal was asking, the libertarians were asking that the state lay off. I have found that is not true for the longest time. They have never said lay off. They've said lay off us and impose it on everybody else. So that's my first problem with them. I'll park that there. Then, what a strange term to use. I've never used that before. I know a lot of people use it. It's my first time. The second thing with this is that you have a conception of the state which is so idyllic. I wish there was a state like that. I wish there was this idea of some form of divinity which is able to see the difference between right and wrong and whatever. Actually, what we have seen, it was fascinating that when Gandhi was in South Africa, he went there believing in the law. He was a barrister. He went there as a lawyer. He thought he was carrying the law, and he would go into the courtroom and there would be fairness and justice. In his journey through the courts in South Africa, he learned that law is actually an instrument that's being used by the powers that be, whoever has the power.
Yeah.
By the time he came back to India, he was saying, don't go to the law. Don't go to the state.
Yeah.
You have a problem, resolve it yourselves. And if you look at the Ahmedabad mill workers strike, that's what he attempted to do. He said you might lose a little, you might gain a little, but, it's a far better route to take than the route that you will take if you go to the state, because the state has it has its own interests. See, if we talk of a dispassionate state, that is a non-existent entity. It's a passionate state which wants something for somebody. It is not impossible that a state may want something for those who are most in need of its support. But we don't find such states too often. And we certainly haven't found that, when you have the extent of disparity you have in India, the sense of like in the 2002 judgment where this court said that we are overwhelmed by the extent of the problem, so let's not deal with it. Let's find something else.
Yeah.
Let's demolish all of them. Let them go find their own lives. Let's clean up the world, the area around us. This is a very common, state response. So I'm not able to respond to your idea of this ideal state which will actually care about people and go in only when there is a problem that a more vulnerable person has if it's in a vulnerable community. I think that doesn't exist. And that's why this idea of keeping a state in check is so important. The problem is that when there's 80% of the people who are in various conditions of poverty who have to, work really hard just to keep themselves alive. And it was fascinating. We had a discussion with Shankarji of MKSS. And he would, he had this chart out for pension. And he said, how much does each person in government get as pension? How many days would they have worked? How many years would they have worked? And for that, how much pension are they getting now? And all the people who were on social security pension were asking was, at that time, 200 rupees to 500 rupees.
Mm-hmm.
And you felt that you couldn't give that. You felt that people were too greedy to be asking for 500 rupees. Then he said something that was so poignant, and that's something that Bezwada Wilson of Safai Karamchari Andolan also said. When we were talking about, when you're making an application with the court, shouldn't you ask for pension for people who are in manual scavenging? He said, don't worry about that, Usha. And I said, why not? He said, hardly anybody in this profession reaches pensionable age. You think about what that means. So, and this is after how many years? So I'm not able to get into the construct that you're offering me because actually it is an unreal concept, whereas people are leading real lives. The other thing is when you say, shouldn't people make their own decisions? In questions of development, for instance, you have what happened in Niyamgiri. Niyamgiri is such a classic example where actually the project, the bauxite mining on Niyamgiri Hill was to go ahead anyway. And they wanted it, and they were looking at the Forest Advisory Council to give the clearance for the government to give the clearance for them to do this. And it took a while before the people on the sides of the hills, the Dongriya cones, before they said, what on earth, how can you come and, mine here? And I remember I went there twice on two different missions. And the second time I went, I had them asking me, So, at that time Ayodhya was, they were going to build the temple in Ayodhya, and they said, how is it that when it is your temple and your God, you think it should be in a particular place and it can't be anywhere else? But when I'm telling you that all our gods are residing, Niyamaraja is residing on top of the hill, you don't think that the God needs to continue there. So there was this sense that you don't know who we are and you don't care to know. In fact, when we asked them, if you do this, the company will bring Anganwadis and they'll get you health services and schools. Don't you want schools? And they said, of course we want education. But we don't want an education that alienates us from our own lives. And then they said, okay, we know why all this is coming to us now, because you want to take away what we have. This is the model of development that I'm talking about. If we were to do away with all this, all this kind of injustice, and then ultimately what happened, the court had to say, okay, they have a right. They are PVTGs. Now we know what they are particularly vulnerable to. And they are PVTGs. Go and ask them. Let the district magistrate go from village to village. And those villages are not big villages. It's like 8 to 20 huts is the maximum. Go and ask them in each of those whether this project is okay for them. And they said if even one of them says no, you can't carry on with the project. Everybody that they went to 8 villages. Every one of them said no. The thing is, we want to take away agency from people so when we talk about caste and poverty, it's a different question. When we talk about, urban poverty, rural poverty is a different question. Tribal lives, you can't talk about tribals as if they're just, sunken poverty. It's not true at all. There's a richness that comes with them which we haven't acknowledged at all. I mean, look at what we've done with our lives. What has industrialization done? What is, picking up plastic everywhere done? What have we got right that we have this arrogance that we think we know best? I've not understood that at all.
And Usha, I think that I'm empathizing with you. I'm saying that you are actually correct, which is why the state should, being the operative word here, have no value judgment for how you choose to live your life. Because everybody's definition of what is meaningful to them and how they want to organize, their day-to-day should be solely left up to them, right? Your critique is correct, that there is no, real instantiation of the sort of state that I mentioned. It's never existed throughout history. But also something like the modern Indian state, or till 200 years ago, the modern American state, did not exist for all of history until it came to shape. I'm asking a slightly more different question, right? There are two opposing tensions here. So if you're saying that we need a state with an extremely high capability, which is the ability to go to a tribal space, engage with them meaningfully, I mean, to find a bureaucrat who's able to fill an SIR form with what's happening currently now is itself an extraordinary ask, right? Yeah. To find somebody who can meaningfully engage, whatever that means, with a tribal person. The sort of hiring process that state has to go through to find that person is itself difficult. To do that across a country of this size is an almost impossible. It just doesn't make any sense. And we haven't come to it yet, but even the lifting out of poverty, the acts of lifting out of poverty, which are things like provision of healthcare, provision of food supplies, these sorts of things, also demand an extraordinary state capacity, which means you have a big state, which means you have a lot of money going to the state by means of taxation or some revenue generation, which means that a lot of individuals will inevitably have that call to power, because the call to power in it has a call to money. There's a way to make money in the process, have influence over things, bring their own personal agendas and vendettas into that process. Then you create a big state. When you create a big state that calls on the worst impulses in us to join politics and be part of the political fore, then the sorts of outcomes that you get are these heavily statist, centralized movements. The state that I'm with this hat on imagining is one that simply does not have the ability to issue a mountain to be a bauxite mine for a large MNC or
sure.
An industrialist. That ability is not granted as part of the constitutional setup of the country, right? And I'm wondering to what degree our activism to the end of helping things like poverty is not really about poverty. It's about limiting what the state can do to simply those questions of liberal principles, where we say we have to the best of our ability come to a place where we think this is a model way to conduct human lives, and broadly leave decision making to you on how you want to live. Your definition of happiness, my definition may be different, and the state has no business even thinking about happiness, but will protect our liberal rights. Because one of the challenges is, let's say that we have a sleeping state, and an industrialist simply shows up at a mountain or a beach or whatever and begins to mine, right? When they show up, we want the group living there, right? These previously non-vulnerable groups who suddenly have found themselves becoming vulnerable, to be able to show up at one of our courts. We want them to come to our liberal institution, our liberal courts, and say, hey, something's happening to me that I think is, and for them to be able to show up there, we want them to be part of this country. Because they're not part of our jurisdiction, then we will say that we don't have the ability to enact justice for you, what we think is justice. And so if you want to put a policeman between the bulldozer and that tribal community, the only way to do it is for them to be part of this liberal state. And so I think shrinking the state would be the answer, because when you shrink the state, you remove the ability for the state to be crony, to be lobbied, right? It's just simply not in their power. And in doing that, then you tell the capitalist, hey, if you want to play the capitalist game, you're free to. Go participate in the free market. Go talk to the tribals and see if you can convince them to, freely sign off. It's a contracts problem. And that second bit there is also important, that then it has to be a property question, right? Because imagine when the tribal group shows up at the court and tells the court that, hey, listen, I have somebody wanting to mine off a mountain where I believe my gods live. The court will ask the question, why can't they go there? Why can't they go on the mountain? And simply because you have been climbing the mountain for the last 100 years, or your grandfather has, does not necessarily mean that somebody else can't come on the mountain as well, right? Maybe you can limit their activity. Maybe they can come and they can pray, but they can't bulldoze. So we'll have to think about that. But ultimately, from a liberal institutional framework, it'll boil down to a rights question. Like the court will ultimately use the language, we think that the right to what happens to this mountain boils down to this group, right? And maybe even within that group, they'll have to figure out how a voting mechanism works. That is, they may end up saying that it may so be that even if one person objects, nobody can do it. Or they may say that, if a large majority, so you have to find some way to pragmatically, like you said, solve that concern. But I'm not saying how we escape the institution and the liberalism and the imposition of liberalism. And that's sort of my argument.
I think it's just a different worlds we live in, and the different worlds we imagine. So the first thing is that it's not just a question of whether the state should be a large state or it should be a small state. The question is, why do we have a state at all? And I think it's one of the very important things in the Indian Constitution that we have a whole part on fundamental rights and we have a whole part on socio-economic rights. And it's not an accident. It happened because of the experience that people had during the freedom movement, where they said, listen, we can't have a state where individuals don't have rights, where people are not protected from the state. So let's not forget that that's the fundamental conception of what this is. And when that gets forgotten, the state becomes whether it's a small state or it's a large state, it becomes very powerful. And, that kind of power residing, the state is meant to deliver to a people what the people are asking it to deliver. The complication in a country like India is that there is no such thing as a people. There are simply too many interests at play, and there are some which are more powerful. There are some which, so it's much more complex when we talk about it here. But we can't have the state becoming the arbiter of all of this. There's one thing that I have found in the context of poverty particularly, that we tend, and I know I used this word before, but there is a tendency to infantilize them. It's like persons in conditions of poverty can't speak for themselves. They don't know enough. If they knew enough, they wouldn't be in poverty. So that it's a kind of dismissal of people who already find themselves on the margins of state thought. The state thought in the sense that if we didn't have elections, I don't even know if the state would be thinking, people in state would be thinking about them. So there is also this idea of poverty as a condition of dangerousness. That ostensible poverty is something that should be removed as a dangerous thing. So the idea that when you don't have anything, you have nothing to lose, and therefore you might do something dangerous. I think these are all disproved things. A lot of the kind of crimes that occur, it's only now we are recognizing that there are crimes, it's the past 20 years.
Yeah.
With liberalization, it became even more open that these crimes are happening. And so we are saying that, crime is not just about, like you said, cutting a person's hand off. It is actually about incapacitating them entirely and taking everything to yourself. We've seen that happen so much. And so the idea that the whole state can actually be converted, diverted to the purpose of one person or one set of persons is something that we are seeing. And that is a kind of social offense. It doesn't need to be, it won't be put into the law because the state is looking for GDP. See, it's also a question of what the priority of the state is, no? If the priority when you said, I wouldn't use the word happiness, I actually would. I actually think, for me, the Gen Z protests, I think among the most vibrant, the things that made me really happy was how when people came to say what their problems were, they were able to do it with laughter and cheer. I don't think our generation had the ability to do it. We were somber and sullen when we were complaining. When we were saying that you're doing the wrong thing, we didn't know to say it with joy. And it's incredible that you have a generation that's teaching us what it means to be joyous in the middle of all these burdens that have been placed on them. So I would actually bring it back to that and say that, people have asked me, for instance, because I work in the field of poverty, they'll ask me, why do you keep saying that they're having a hard time? They're all laughing and playing. Those people that you saw under the flyover are going to be, you'll find the children are playing there, they're playing tag. It doesn't take away from that condition which we have created. So when you tell me about the state being the liberal state and being small or big or whatever, these conditions have been created by the policies of the state. They didn't happen by accident. When they decided that construction work is more important than having, that you can bring in polyester or whatever and the weaving community will not have any more work here, it was a decision of the state that brought them to this. So the state being active is not necessarily a good thing. So I think one of the things that the state has lost its ability to do is to listen to a multiplicity of voices and care about what each of them is saying. It's responding to those who are loudest and closest much more than it is to anyone else. And when you say that to know what happens at the, far away, you need to have a large state so that they can all go out. A large state will not solve that problem. Actually, that's where all of us come in, no? Everybody needs to care. The conversation has to change. What they are hearing is not these conversations. And, if, for instance, for me, it's always been a cautious thing that I don't speak for the poor. I speak for myself. Because I care about people in conditions of poverty, I speak for myself to say, where is it that we are going wrong? Who are we that we think we can actually allow for people or put people in these conditions of poverty? How can, when you have a Delhi High Court now constantly saying, I'm going to clean up Delhi and I'm going to throw all these people out. And you say, demolish the Madrasi camp immediately, throw them all out. If any of them is eligible for resettlement, then make arrangements. So you first destroy their houses, you throw them out and you preen about it. Now, this is where the problem is. Just having a state is not going to help that. We owe very much more. And, if we think that this will keep us safe and secure, you look at the way walls are rising, you look at the way gated communities are. Why do we feel insecure? Because we are creating those conditions for us to feel insecure. It's not like people are doing anything. It's not like they've walked into our houses. Actually, if you look at from 1997, 98 to now, if you look at the number of demolitions in Delhi, the rise in crime should have been about 1,000-fold, given the anxieties of those who have, worrying that those who don't have will come and, do whatever it is that they'll do to them. They haven't done it. These are human beings, and we dehumanize when we think of them as just poor, dangerous people.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that I'm not able to answer the question directly to what you're saying, because actually the paradigms are different.
No, I hear you.
Yeah.
I'm just, you're absolutely right. Again, I continue to wear this hat. You're absolutely right. And I'm saying that the tension still exists. When you say that the state has created the circumstances that lead to the poverty of millions, anybody who's a classic liberal, libertarian, all of this, these labels are fairly ambiguous, but you get the point.
Yeah.
Will vehemently stand with you. Like they will say this is absolutely true. And in fact, it can be no other way. I think that's the material claim that may be different between what you're saying and what they're saying, right? That in fact, it can be no other way. Because if you design this sort of a state that has far-reaching powers, that can do lots of varied things, that can tell a tribal group that I'm going to give your land to somebody else under this eminent domain provision that allows them to mine. If it can do that, it will.
Okay, let me just get in there. See, the thing is, actually, we have not said that. If you look at our constitution, we have some parts of it which are very significant. And I'm going back to the constitution partly because it's some kind of a founding document for us, but also because it says there the problems that we had anticipated. So the first thing is they said, the constitution is not about the power of the state. It is the limits of the power of state over a people. We've forgotten that. it said that to its economic, to the extent of its economic capacity, its job is to make sure that there is, that there isn't huge inequalities, that there isn't a concentration of wealth in a few hands, because that will lead to the common detriment. That everybody has, the work that they want, that they need all those basic things. They must also have, later they introduced legal aid because they realized everything is going to the law. And I must also say this, that it's not like we've been like this all along. After the emergency, whether it was because, there are many theories on this, but one of the commonly believed ones was that the Supreme Court had a sense of shame that it had actually said, it had endorsed what an authoritarian state was asking it to endorse. And so it needed to get out of that cloud. And so they brought in this concept. It was already in the making, but they kind of brought it onto the stage of having public interest litigation. And if you look at the early cases of public interest litigation, you'll find that, for instance, in Bihar, in all the jails in Bihar, they put together and they found there were 18,133 prisoners who had been there for periods longer than they would be given a sentence if they were convicted.
Yeah.
And nobody bothered with them. So there are many categories. And then we found that in that about 7, 8 to 10 years, there were many kinds of people. Bonded labor. Can you imagine that in this time and age, when slavery was supposed to have been abolished a long time back, when we should, there would be a sense of shame in saying that we have bonded labor. We brought in a law in 1976, 75 actually, with an ordinance, saying that acknowledging we have bonded labor, and the court actually worked with people who were working on the ground to say we need to abolish this bonded labor and what are the things that we need to do. So, there was a time when compassion wasn't a bad thing, when we were not, when we were ashamed of what we were not ashamed of admitting to what we were. There's a big difference between the two. And then that went into the liberalization era, and then, which is why when you say the liberal state, that's what the libertarians wanted, as the liberal state. And that has completely destroyed those rights again. And it has made compassion weakness. Compassion is anti-development. So compassion is not about kindness to somebody else. Compassion is something that you have in common with everybody, saying that when you feel it, I feel it. If I feel happiness, I want you to share in it. If you feel sorrow, I want to share in it. Because if I don't understand it, I will be inconsiderate to it forever and ever. And that's not humanity.
Yeah. Okay, then I'm going to try and wear my second hat. Okay. My second hat is in defense of 1991 and the liberal reforms, but broadly just the economic theories that underpin this way of thinking. Now, something earlier when we were talking, you said that you were talking about weavers who've lost a lot of their trade and employment because of the ability to import or substitute a lot of their work, industrial solutions or other mechanical solutions. And this also came up in our conversation leading up to this. When we were talking on our first video call, I remember that you brought up something very similar. Okay, now let me rephrase this entire problem in the language of freedom, okay, which is something like, I would like to buy a blanket, and that is my choice to make. Now, it's a very complicated question actually, because if we have to use the word like buy, then we ask questions about money, where I got my money from. So we have some of those layers. But let's presume that what I want to acquire is a blanket, and maybe to make the example easy, I will remove money from the equation, and I will say that I simply want to barter something that I can offer. For example, I can offer somebody a great haircut or a great massage, and so I simply want to barter my massage for a blanket. And I go out into the world and I see one person who is a weaver, who is extremely skilled. Generationally, they across generations, they've been learning how to weave, and they make an exceptional blanket. And another person is a trader who brought in a blanket from China, right? And that second blanket costs me one haircut or one massage, but the second is going to be 20 massages or 20 haircuts, right? And I'm saying that, look, ultimately what I want is a blanket. And it's not as if either party is more or less human. This human is also human and that human is also a human being. And as an individual, I'm making this choice to freely transact and buy this blanket. Now, what's the consequence? The consequence is this weaver is facing the same decision from tens of thousands of customers. Everybody who comes to the marketplace is preferring the Chinese imported blanket to this weaver's blanket. And so ultimately what happens to this weaver is that their skill has been entirely disregarded. It matters not that they have built this meaningful skill over time. In fact, to the market, it's as if they have no skill at all, because that skill is no longer valued from this purely free market space. And they enter the realm of poverty, because there really is not many other options of things that they can do, right? And of course, the traders gotten very rich because millions of individual people have decided to buy the blanket directly from them, and so they've made quite a bit of money. Okay, now we've had a collection of free choices. Nobody here has gone out to attack the weaver or feel negatively towards them, right? Everyone's making a free choice. Or maybe to simplify the example, I don't want to say Chinese blanket. I want to say that he's an industrialist who set up a plant, etc., etc. Okay, just so that we now imagine what the state does. Okay, so now we have this state who's watching this unfold, like somebody like you who's an activist working with the weaving community goes to the state and says, look, there are 200 women here in this village whose entire livelihoods are based on this activity, and they can no longer sell because of imports and machines, etc. Now the state has a bunch of choices to make, right? One thing they can say is that we will no longer allow imports from China. We'll block the trade route. So India will be a closed-off country, and by and large, you'll trade internally. Or second, we'll increase the cost of making that blanket to about the cost of what it costs the weaver to make a blanket by imposing a tariff in the middle or some sort of taxation, so that for me as a buyer, I may still prefer the weaver's blanket. It's a fair market, whatever that means. But the state will also look at me as a consumer and say, Deepak would have spent 200 rupees to buy that blanket. Now he's spending 50 rupees. What is he doing with the remaining 150 rupees, right? And maybe there's somebody else who's not a weaver, but something else, right? Somebody else somewhere in the economy who's also a human being, who also has a family to feed, etc., who's now getting my 150 rupees that I may not have given them before because I gave the entire 200 to this weaver in the first place. And so the state takes another step back and says, okay, so maybe the value that is being accrued from a utility framework is actually, it's not lost. It's being displaced. Like, this person no longer has the value, but there are other people who have it. And if I bring it back, if I step in the middle and put in policy that concentrates this wealth back to the hand of the weaver, there are other people who will lose, and many of them have a chance of slipping into poverty. And this becomes a central planner's dilemma. It's too complicated. Like, to know what people want, like what color would I prefer, next month what would I care about, there's a war in Iran and suddenly I don't have enough here. It's too complicated to manage the economics of this, that a good liberal state or the libertarian's conception of a state would say, I'm actually not going to interfere at all. I'm going to take a step back and let this market unfold by itself. In theory, what would happen is that weaver would enter broadly this problem of, I don't have employment anymore because my job's been taken away. And there may be adjacent methods of employment. Like, for example, some other entrepreneur will realize that, hey, what I need is a great weaver, but for some other application. And, there's a whole pool of weavers here who don't have employment right now, and maybe I can give it to them. Or the weaver finds some other way to start their own business, band together. So some sort of a solution, the belief is some sort of solution will emerge from within the economy that is not unfair to any parties, because we discussed that moral level is at the individual. On an individual level, everybody has truly meaningfully consented. Nobody has been compelled in any point in this transaction to do anything that they didn't want to do individually. So the state should not interfere. Right? Now, that's the libertarian's argument for why you need a highly liberalized, open economy that trades the whole world, entirely globalized, because we shouldn't be bound to protect one group or another group, because it will be at the detriment of somebody else, and it's too hard to centrally plan this. How would you think about this?
So that's 2-3 things. It's actually quite interesting, because it's so far from my way of thinking that it's really interesting. The first thing is that I'm thinking, can I think of anything at all which has developed in this country, which has happened just on its own, just sui generis? Did the displacement of the weaver happen because it just happened and somebody else found another way? Or did it happen because the state gave a license for something to be imported, which would allow for that to happen?
I'm very sorry to cut you off, okay?
Yeah.
I just want to say that the globalized way of thinking about the world is, there's no concept of a license to import. By definition, you can import whatever you want, because
but that's an ideal state. I don't think it's an ideal state, but whatever, for whoever it is. The fact is that here, when we entered globalization, and even before, this actually started even before, we just adapted it and carried with it into liberalization. Yeah. I find it fascinating that I really can't think of anything that has happened. I mean, today when you're talking about AI, you're talking about the state giving a whole chunk of money to somebody and saying, no, come on, do it, and giving it to one set of people. And just, you keep arming them with more and more and more. There is nothing that's just happening from the ground. In fact, what happens from the ground is what the small man is doing. It's not what these big people are doing. Every one of these things that you're talking about increases inequality in such measure that the world can never be the same again for either. And it's never going to be equal opportunity again, or equal chance, or equal imagination, or equal anything. So anything that produces that level of inequality, we really need to check it to see whether, if somebody is a genius. If you had another Einstein coming in, who's a genius, who also made his own mistakes, but then you can say that, okay, there is some huge brilliance that's sitting here and you can value that. But when it is in economic terms, I'm sorry, but it just doesn't work along the same ways. And I'm actually reminded of this brilliant book which was written by Brian Merchant called There's Blood in the Machine. And because you said Weaver so many times, I was reminded of that, because in that book, he's a tech journalist, and people, every time he would say something that was not, complimentary to tech, he would be called a Luddite. And he said, so let me go find out who this Ludd is. And he goes back and he finds that it comes from somewhere in 1807, 1808, in that period, when the weavers when the handloom weavers were being displaced by, or at least they were trying to be taken over by power loom weavers. And they were saying, the weavers were saying that, listen, this power loom does two things. One, it takes away all our employment and asks us to come and be servants in their cause. And the second thing, it produces scrap. Why are we valorizing that over all the wonderful work that we do? We really produce good stuff, and they are just producing something that is, one mass scale, whatever, which has no meaning. And so what they did was the letters would go out in Ludd's name, warning the employer that they would be coming to destroy the power loom. And the history records that the only thing when they entered, they would warn them, then they would go that night, and they would only destroy the power loom and come back. It was not a case of large-scale destruction. What is interesting is what came after. Because you have the employers then, the power loom owners starting to complain about this, then they have their access to political power, and very soon you find that they are changing the law to say that anybody who's going to come in and break a power loom will get the death sentence. So when we talk, this idea of the state, how does the state work? Who does the state work for? And when these redundancies get created, had the state no part in creating the redundancy? Did it just happen in a free market? And every market that wants to be free, the report that was produced in Wattel Committee report in 2016, there is one passage there where the one thing that all these guys want, who are, they're all asking the state to make changes, is get your hands off all the welfare schemes. Let them come to the market and buy it from us. You're talking about people who have nothing because of the policies that have happened through the years. And now you tell them, now come to the market and buy it from us. If you want, you give them the money to come and buy it from us because we want the money at the end of the day. This is not free market. So I think even the idea of the free market is a complete myth. We know, how does the American state function? It goes to war in the Middle East, in West Asia, so that they can get all that they can get. You're using American taxpayers' money to go and have all these wars. Where is this free market you're talking about?
Yeah.
Even in an idealized condition, it doesn't exist. So,
the anger that you have is...
No, I'm actually more amused than angry. I'm like, okay, you can keep living in your myths because you have the luxury of living in your myth. If this myth were to hit out at you, you wouldn't be laughing anymore. And that's why people aren't laughing when they see this before them, no?
No, it's absolutely shared by I don't think the classic liberal and where you are too far apart. This anger is shared.
This is my tragedy because we are talking completely different...
languages.
It seems like we used to have this on land acquisition. They'll say, we are also saying the state should keep off land acquisition. And I'll be like, no, I'm talking about coercive eviction. Very different thing from land acquisition. But it would seem like it's the same thing. It's not the same thing.
Yeah. I've been reading a lot of Slavoj Žižek recently. Žižek is this...
Yeah, okay. He's a fabulous guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to admit, I don't think I even understand what he's saying sometimes. Like, it takes me 5 readings. He's so written in such a complicated manner. Yeah. And there's this very...
strange way, there's a Orissa paper that carries his, in their op-ed, regularly they carry his articles. So you see a lot of it.
It's outstanding.
It's simple when it is written for the press like that.
he identifies as a moderately conservative communist, which I think is so funny, and like and it's not just a joke. I think that there's actually something there in his analysis of what he wants to identify as. And so Zizek has this there's an interview where he says he tells a story of a man who goes to a restaurant, and the waiter comes by and he says, "Look, I'd like to have a cup of coffee with sugar, coffee with cream, but hold the cream." Yeah, and the waiter looks at him and says, "Look, I don't have any coffee with cream, but I have coffee with sugar, so I'll give you that and I'll hold the sugar." Right? And Zizek says, ultimately it's a cup of coffee. Whether you give me coffee with cream, hold the cream, or coffee with sugar, hold the sugar, what difference does it make? But because he's coming off Hegel and Lacan, and that's his sort of intellectual background, he's saying it really does matter what's missing in the coffee. Right? Intellectually, it's the same thing. Like I'm wearing this hat, I may say that, look, I agree with you. I agree with you that the state, does produce inequities in the market by interfering in the market. And then you're saying the same thing. We seem like we both ordered a cup of coffee, but you've held the sugar and I've held the cream. And so when we attempt to have any further meaningful conversation beyond that, we're suddenly at odds with each other. Everything's fallen apart because we thought we agreed, and then when we've attempted to do something with this agreement, there really isn't.
I don't think you thought we agreed. I never thought we agreed.
Okay, fair enough. Again, I'm just wearing a hat here, and I will try and put on a different hat at some point. But okay, so I want to come back to this, right? I want to say three things when it comes to the liberalized idea of a market. The agreement would be that yes, meaningful distortions in the market have taken place because the state has intervened. The correction of these distortions, the claim would be, cannot be statist solutions. To correct the distortions, if the state is just further intervention, it's like sugar being dissolved in water. You can't undissolve the sugar, and adding more salt doesn't fix it, right? At this point, it's not like there's a way to correct the evils that have already occurred. And a person like this would be very empathetic to the fact that, we did have colonized rule for 200 years, and then we did have all the way through the emergency, and then even after that, a very statist response. In the last 15 years of India have been an even more aggressive state, doing even more aggressive things across the country. Now, if somebody like you were to come to power and you had the ability to think about policy, right? Or you had the ability to influence policy with somebody who did come to power. The advice, the recommendation would be, maybe what we should do is actually to have the state deregulate, that is, do less things within the market, remove the barriers it's already put in place. And I think there is some wisdom here in this, because if we look at 2-3 measures, right? I know that you said that you want to look at general well-being and happiness, and those are measures. But really, poverty.
I'm saying they're not irrelevant.
Not irrelevant, absolutely. But per capita GDP is a good way to think about whether, like, really, if somebody is earning $50 a year, that's just a life of abject suffering and poverty, and we know that. And that one measure has improved dramatically since the liberalization, the 1991 liberal reforms. And you're right that it's produced meaningful inequality, right? Like, India is a more unequal country today than it was 20 years ago. And they may say that that's not specifically a problem. That's a feature, not a bug. And the way to argue this would be, let's say that I would ask you the question, as a poor person, where would you rather live? Would you rather live in India or Bangladesh, or would you rather live in Denmark or Norway or the US? And almost every poor person would say, I would actually rather live in the US or in Norway. And the reason for that, I'm thinking about, like, behind Rawls' veil, right? Like, I mean, I understand that you have family, and like those things will tie you. But if it was a truly objective decision, and we may also think about how people vote with their feet. So think about migration. Even illegal immigrants or legal immigrants, we don't see people en masse immigrating to Bangladesh or immigrating to India, right? When they leave their countries, they all seem to head to Denmark and Norway and the US. So there's even evidence from, like, just people voting with their feet that they seem to want to be in these economies. But these are the most unequal economies. Like in the US, there's literally a trillionaire in that country, right? It's so exorbitantly unequal. And maybe then the fight to fight is not inequality, it's poverty. If everybody is not poor, but some people are so exorbitantly rich compared to other people who are not poor, but just not rich, that's still fine. Because for the fight that you are fighting, which is the poverty fight, that means the inability to do practically anything else. Don't have the ability to even think meaningfully about how do I plan a 5-year vision, how do I get my family together. It's just really hand to mouth, and sometimes not even that. And so simply exiting that condition is significantly more important than the fact that somebody has a gazillion times more wealth than I do. Right? That's actually fine. He has 5 private jets and I don't. And the beauty of this sort of free market capitalist enterprise, they would argue, is that it's able to produce almost all goods and services at a meaningfully high and similar quality for a lot of people. Like as an example, I know you don't use a phone, but if you did buy a phone today, you'd buy an iPhone. The very best phone you could buy is an iPhone, I don't know, whatever the latest version is, right? Which is the same phone I have, which is the same phone the King of Saudi Arabia has. It's not as if the King of Saudi Arabia can even get a better phone. There is no company making that for him, right? The very best possible phone through this capitalist process has been something that almost everybody in most parts of the world, like they have 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion people who have the same phone, can afford. Even at 5,000 rupees today, right, in India, you could get a phone that gives you access to the internet, a camera, right? And so that's something that a state can never accomplish. It's only something that the free market can accomplish, where if you give the entrepreneur the incentive to be able to deliver something en masse, they will really go out there and do that. And that produces inequality. It really does. But it also then produces the ability for you with a limited income to buy lots of varied things as opposed to some very specific things. Because if you want to buy a weaver's really great blanket, then you may not have enough money left over for all the other things. But the argument here would be, let them freely choose. If somebody so deems that they want to sleep in a terrible blanket, that's better than no blanket at all. And actually this person, this other entrepreneur who's importing from China or making it through an industrialized solution, is providing to an entire market of people who don't have a blanket today, who are getting it at 5 rupees or 10 rupees, as opposed to the only other option which existed, which was the weaver's blanket, which was too expensive. And so this is I'm trying to step into the mind of a libertarian, right, and tell you. So they're saying something like, because it's so complicated to solve so many problems, and we don't believe the state can do it. And any state that accumulates too much power becomes this crony state, that then you have an Ambani or an Adani, and you just have these people who are not adding any value to the market, but are just hoarding wealth for themselves. What you want is a minimal state with no ability to enact cronyism, who then says, you'll actually figure it out in the free market. We think by and large that will produce better results than what we could ever do. So back to my earlier example, yes, sugar has been mixed in the water, but I don't think we should add any more salt. We shouldn't reverse policy. We shouldn't add a counter policy. We should just abolish policy. That's the position that they will hold.
So I'll start somewhere.
Yeah, sure.
Because there was something early on in what you said which reminded me about what has been done with labor. And I think that's been one of the big things that they've been talking about, saying that make it free for us to do whatever we want with labor. We might employ them for 15 hours. We might employ them for 8 days.
Yes.
In a week, we might do whatever. But don't give labor rights, because that becomes really problematic for us. And so that has more or less been achieved by now. It's been, fought, and they've convinced the state that they should do that. And this has come through a law. Whereas all the rights that the thing is, for instance, collective bargaining. Everybody needed to get together for them to have at least 1/10 or whatever, a small portion of the power that the employer has, because everything else is with the employer. Now, that has all been dismembered.
Yeah.
And you say that none of that is important. So what do we have in its place? We have a huge informal economy, and we have no responsibility to make sure that there is enough for things to go around. And then you have a state that says, report yourself to me, and I will figure out if I need to help you at any time. So it's completely... and everyone talks about the gig worker economy, for instance. Says, what on earth have we done to ourselves? Why have we reduced people to just this? To people who are going to take risks with the traffic every day and be on platform economies where there's nobody is accountable. So we have actually, through this process, said that labor has no rights, because if labor has rights, it becomes a problem for us to be productive, and we need to be in the market. Let everything be in the market. Let labor also be in the market. But capital will be in the market only among those who have capital. So they have a little club, and within that they will be playing with having either, public issues or whatever, and seeing who's going to get more money. And they will also be looking to see how the state can help them get more money by, conducting wars for them.
Yeah.
Or conducting, if it's not, conducting war in a country, it's conducting war on a certain set of people. So I don't buy this. I don't buy that this is free market. I don't buy that this is being done through state intervention, very deliberate intervention, breaking down things that workers had got for themselves. Maybe the Indian worker in colonial times did not have the ability to fight for it for themselves, or did not have the imagination, but it was done in different places, and that imagination moved here. And initially, they felt that, okay, people are not leaving agricultural fields and coming to the factories, so we'll give them some kind of a protection so that they will come. Once they came and you felt that they were captive, you took all that away. So all this is manipulated. There is nothing free market in this. So I don't buy that at all. On that, there were again a lot of questions. So let me just think a little. So in our context, what we did was we had this, when liberalization started, we knew we were dropping many people off the map. And you knew that was a definite thing that would happen, which is why in the middle of an era where you say the state won't intervene, the state intervened to say, all right, we won't touch the market, but we will go to the people who are going to be affected by that. So you had NREGA, so you had National Food Security, you had Forest Rights Act. All these came at a time when liberalization was supposed to have been at its best. Why did they need to come in? Because without, a free market is not free. It produces things for some people, and there are many people who are going to get completely lost because it's not as if state policy started yesterday. State policy has been there all along. It's already created inequalities, and those who are more equal than others are the ones who are asking for freedom at a certain time. It's very interesting when Henry Sumner Maine wrote about ancient law. In that, there's one thing that he says which is really fascinating. He says, when you establish a code, it matters at what point in time you establish the code.
Right.
Whoever is dominant at that time will be controlling what the code is. And then you'll say, oh, but this is the equal code for everybody. It's not equal. So, the fact that you needed an NREGA, you needed national food security, just think about what it means in a country where we are saying that free market is going to produce everything for everybody. And then in 2016, you have them going and saying that take away these protections of food security and whatnot, because we want these people also to come to the market. If you have the money to give them that, you give it to them, let them come and buy it from us. There is a certain imagination of where the state should step off. The state should step off wherever those who are, going with business and to the market, who are saying that we are the market, the state needs to step off, from preventing or from not encouraging anyone, from discouraging people from coming to that market. But everywhere else, the state needs to be there because it needs to quell various things. It needs to quell protest. For all that, you need the state. That's not a free market. When people are coming out onto the streets and saying, listen, my jobs are going and I have nothing at all for it, you want the state to come in and stop them because you call that anarchy. Actually, that is representation.
Yeah. When you say that, for example, take the minimum wage or any sort of labor regulations, right? Earlier in the podcast, you said the state has intervened in the lives of individual people in such a way that has further propelled the condition of poverty. Somebody wearing this hat, the liberty reformer type hat, would argue that things like minimum wages are an example of that. They are one of the reasons why the poor have remained poor. And this is a little bit of a paradox, right? The argument would be something like almost every let's say well-intentioned, state interference in a free market on behalf of poor people, or presumably on behalf of the poor, in fact, does more to harm them than to help them. Like the example on the minimum wage front would be something like this, right? And I run a company. That's my day job. I have a company that I run, and it's never happened to me. But I could imagine a circumstance where, let's say I have a particular city, and we have ultimately a P&L for the city. We want to know if we make a profit or loss in that city, and if we're not profitable long enough, then it doesn't make any sense to be a business anymore. And I also know how many people I need to run various functions within that organization. One of those, let's say for one of those roles, I only have a budget of 20,000 rupees left. That's really all I have. Beyond that, I'm not able to make the sheets balance, and I need 2 people to take up that role. Now, let's say I'm able to go out into the world, into one of those street corners that you mentioned, where young men are standing who don't have work today, and I were to tell them that, look, I know that the minimum wage from the big government who's sitting in Delhi, he's decided that the minimum wage is 15,000 rupees. But I don't have that from a budgeting standpoint. If I do that, there's no business. There's no business, neither you nor I are able to figure this bit out, right? But if you consent, and there's no compulsion here, but really from what I can see, your current circumstances that you're doing nothing else, right? I can pay you 10,000 rupees. That's what I can afford to pay you. Are you comfortable with that? And what you said is right. We shouldn't infantilize the poor. They do have the ability to think meaningfully about their own circumstance and to decide. And he consents and says, yes, I'm actually okay with this. I'm okay with this being the wage. And then he were to be employed with us. What's happening in this status model is the state is putting a policeman between the two of us and saying, no, you can't finish this transaction. You, unless you're earning 15,000, can earn zero. You earn nothing at all. And you, instead of hiring two people, must now figure out how to make do with one. Which means I start then pushing the boundary of, fine, then this person has to do double the work or X the work. Because at some point, that's how the math ends up working out, right? And if you think about big business, you take a Reliance or whatever, they have the money to do this, to play this game. They'll have lawyers. They'll be able to hit minimum wage and beyond all the time. But the easiest way in especially free markets to exit poverty is to start something. You start like a tea shop, a pani puri shop, whatever it is. You hit some minimum, threshold, then you get somebody else to take over for you. And that's the beauty of it. The beauty of it is that you're able to find entrepreneurial spirit in some way to solve the problem, right? Like I gave somebody the example of helping old women cross the road. If you meaningfully see that there is a traffic jam here, and I just have the intuition that people are struggling to cross the road, I could tell people that I'm going to help you cross the road. It's just 10 rupees for a crossing. And eventually you get enough money saved up. You have to, the Hobbesian view of the world is that it is nasty, brutish and short. That is the condition for almost all of humanity, for all of us. And we've been given this gift of a non-violent world, where suddenly I can go out and be sure I wouldn't get stabbed or mugged or any of these horrible things, because we've created this liberal institution, this liberal state, that's only guaranteeing one thing, that no violence will be inflicted on me or on somebody else, bodily harm. And in that world, the opportunity I'm afforded is to be able to exit this nasty, brutish, short condition that nobody created. It's just a circumstance of the absurdity of being human. On some strange blue planet in the outer wing of a galaxy, an ape evolved into a thinking being that has a first-person sense of self and consciousness, and here we are, and we have to play this game. And of all the possible dystopian ways to arrange, like the free market way to arrange at least affords me the ability to say, I'll take your job for 10,000 rupees. I don't need to get paid 15,000 rupees. And so we've actually prevented lots of poor people from being able to start at 5,000 or 8,000 or 10,000 and then slowly work their way up to show that, yeah, I'm actually doing great work. And if you lose me, you lose this, and then to move up the ladder. I think the same about the gig economy as well, right? The question is truly, what is the other option? These young men who show up on bikes and are riding through traffic, they're not fools.
Actually, that is the problem.
That is the problem.
The problem is that we're not providing any option.
Any option, yeah. But who has provided the answer? For all my dislike of CEOs, the team Zomato, team Swiggy, they've provided an answer. They're saying that yesterday, before I built Zomato or Swiggy or Uber, you were earning nothing. Really, truly, you were standing on the corner of the road. And today, at least the way the Zomato ecosystem works is they'll even give you a bike, right? So like all you need is a driver's license and we'll get you in there. And so it's something that is not poverty. And the libertarian's position would be something like, see, because one we have to agree that the state really can't solve this. There's not enough money to take from all the rich people everywhere to be able to solve all these like difficult problems. It's too hard a knowledge problem. And the rest of the world is doing stuff in parallel. Like the US and China are building, AI, which is going to be a massive industry in itself, while India simply isn't. And so, but in the US at least, it didn't happen because the US government thought about the idea. It's because individual people said that I'm going to start investing billions of dollars into this thing that I think is going to be a big thing tomorrow. And so, just given the sort of dystopian existence that is typically the baseline to being human, and the fact that the capitalist free market at least affords a way out, that as opposed to zero, you're getting 5,000 or 10,000 or whatever it is, and you're meaningfully consenting because I'm not being paternalistic, you are a consenting, meaningful adult, that this is a much better solution than to put a policeman in the middle to regulate, etc. And so what they're saying is not lobby the state to create more regulation. It is lobby the state to remove regulation that has been otherwise impeding both the poor and the capitalist. That's how they would argue this.
Actually, it's kind of not working for this reason that, see, in India particularly, the organized sector is so small that it's not like they've been burdened with too much. I think it's a myth that is of deliberate creation, because you want all of it broken down. The idea of the minimum wage is that below this, it will not be human existence for them. So to say that, they are willing to come and they're willing to work is because they are already in such a bad condition that they will be willing to come for anything at all. And so we in the Indian Constitution, we have only two parts which are fascinating because they become offences on their own. One is the offence of untouchability. And the other is there are rights against exploitation. And the reason we have that is because we know that we have a whole mass of people who, unless the minimum is set for them, will find themselves always being kept under the minimum. So there is a logic to why this idea of the minimum wage came in. And it's a logic that has actually, the problem for me with the minimum wage is not that everybody is having to pay the minimum wage. It is that once a minimum wage is prescribed, many people feel that it's enough to pay the minimum wage. You just have to be within the law. And that tells me how important it is to have a law. Because if you don't, so there are, and I don't accept your binaries either. It's not like, I have something running and I go to these two people and I say, come and work with me. There are many other arrangements that can be made. And if your business is going to be such that either it produces such a global good that, somebody else should also be willing to bring something to it, or if it's only going to produce things which can be done only by exploitative rates, then I'm not sure it deserves to be there. For me to work on my own is one thing, but when I'm bringing people in, so if, for instance, you were to say that, listen, I expect this to turn the corner if we really work hard on this, and it will become more, so will you become partners with me in this? It's one thing. If you were to say, I'll give you IOUs, which I will respect, it's another. There are many other ways of dealing with this. But we never think of people, you talk about the agency of those people, but you never talk about equality. Why can't they be equal with you if you want them to bear the burden of the cost with you? Because they are always only the employees and I am the employer, and there has to be hierarchy. In this country, hierarchy kills most things, and it certainly kills the idea of humanity.
This is a language thing. I cannot tell you, I'm really enjoying myself. I know this is I typically do this at the end of the podcast and I say how much I really enjoyed myself. But I'm really enjoying myself because this is the coffee with cream, coffee with sugar, right? Like it's so similar our use of language, but it's so distinct what these two people are saying. The language of contracts would be something like this, right? It would say that, let's say, okay, like when I met my co-founder, actually it was not like this, but let's say in theory I met my co-founder like this, where I said, look, you and I want to get into the chair manufacturing business because we think that more chairs have to be made for whatever reason. And then we shake hands on the idea. Then we ask the question, okay, we need somebody who will ferry the chairs from point A to point B, right? And so somebody who has a truck or whatever. Now we'll go out into a market and basically say, okay, who have a truck, and find somebody who does have a truck, and we'll say, look, are you willing to ferry the truck? He'll say yes or no based on some pricing. And what we end up with is a contract. And again, back to my idea of like that, this is why property rights become an important part of the conversation, because the contract is only possible if we're saying things like, you own your body, I own mine, you are a consenting adult, I'm a consenting adult, correct. You own your truck, the money that you earn to buy the truck is, and especially for the poor, because given that the poor have so little to own, the rights over the little that they own should be as powerfully protected as possible, which is why the property rights argument becomes even more central. Okay, but let's say that. And now we've signed a contract. Now, if that person were to come to me tomorrow and say, Deepak, I've been ferrying your chair logs back and forth for the last 10 years. You guys have become such a large and, respectful business, profitable business. I need a share of the profits that have come because I have been the person ferrying the logs back and forth. As an entrepreneur, I may respond saying, look, we had a contract that governed the nature of our relationship. Right. At no point did I misrepresent what the relationship was, right? I approached my co-founder to be my partner. As a promoter. I did not approach you for that reason. So our agreement is a promoter agreement, yours is not. And in all this, I'm not even thinking about the government. Like, I know that the government has coerced us into things like NGOs and private limited companies and a Companies Act and the concept of, they have set up the institutional mechanism around Indian capitalism. But a libertarian would say that is cronyism. The fact that the state decides the mechanism by which my promoter and I should work together is an infantilizing of our ability to be able to work together under our terms and conditions, right? We create what we call an entity, but basically what that means is it's the two of us building something together. And every person we interact with, a vendor, an employee, a customer, is governed by a contract. The liberal state's job is to make sure that we don't default on the contract. One, the contract is not illegal in some way. So, for example, I can't say you're my slave and we sign that into a contract. Correct. Which is the constitutional question. The Constitution prohibits my ability to be able to do something that's not sacred. The right to life is sacred. But beyond that, the state will simply enforce the contract. And that's my way of responding to that question of yours, right? And that person who's taking the job at a 5,000 rupee rate or whatever it is also doing the math. They're saying that, look, I know my current circumstance. And maybe it is that my brother is also working or my wife is also working. And so all I really need this month is 5,000 rupees. I'm doing some math. And the alternative to not having this job is to have no job at all, which is zero. Now again, the libertarian will say that this means that for this person, if all he has in that city is one job, then you're in trouble, because then you have a monopsonist, a monopolist. It's really hard on both those sides to be able to do business. But if you have a reasonably free market, then you have an open market. Lots of people making shares, no cronyism by way of patents and trademarks and shoring up markets for you, right? But all of these are deregulation arguments. This is how can we remove state encroachment that helps protect markets for entrepreneurs, such that for labor, it becomes more competitive to fight for that labor. Then the labor says, sir, you're giving me 5,000, but I have a guy who's giving me 7,000, so I'm going to move tomorrow. Right, and we govern our relationship. So this would be the broad arguments for why we want to think about deregulation, treating the poor people or anybody as a true autonomous individual capable of making their own decisions and choices. And then that the fact that the company itself becomes big tomorrow is your ability, your chance to renegotiate the contract or move to somebody else saying, hey, I work with this company, they did well, I'll work with you. But does not give you rights to the contract between promoters, which you were never party to in the first place, right? Something like this would be the way that they argue. But I want to be careful to note my language. It's a language of individual autonomy and contracts. The presumption is everybody here is an autonomous person with the ability to freely contract their way into and out of things that they want. And I may anticipate just one thing, that you may say that there are lots of people who just don't have, because the power dynamic is so skewed that they don't have this ability to freely contract. Right? That's the core of why we have the state intervening in labor. But there may be one person, like there may be one man who among this group of laborers may say, I really do meaningfully contract. When I say I want to work at 5,000, I'm not being exploited, right? That word itself is like a questionable word, because if everybody's consenting, then it's not exploitation. So he's coming to you and saying, Usha, I'm not being exploited. I want to work at 5,000. Now, why are you preventing me from working with them at 5,000 rupees by enlisting the state between us? That would be sort of one way to think about this.
So there's two.
Please. I find myself like doing very long monologues, which I don't do with any guests actually. I'm really enjoying myself.
So it's going to be all patchy.
Please.
I'm going to tell you. First thing is on the idea of the contract. See, the contract is a commercial document, and it comes at a time where the British are in India. That's when the idea of the contract comes in. And so we have this idea that if there are two parties to a contract and what they contract is got some consideration in it, and if it is not against public policy and certain basic rules like that, then you have to be bound by that contract. Now look where we've come with that. Today, you can have a contract between a company and a state. And it will say that, when we have a difference, we will not go to your courts. We will go to some court somewhere else and do whatever it is we want to do. We are not going. So if you don't come to our courts, our constitution won't bind it. So the constitution becomes irrelevant for people like that. And so my view of the contract is that between equal parties, a contract is okay and they can work out. So, many of them then go to arbitration here and do whatever. And I think that's another whole sad story, which can be kept for another time. But which basically means they move out of the realm of the ordinary person. That's what's happened over time with the contract. Either between a company and a state and you move out of the country altogether, or between two people where you move out of the judicial system and you say, I'll deal with it in some other kind of way. So these are contracts have become states of exception. They are not states of principle. And it's a big difference for me. The idea that a few people may be happy to be exploited is something that in a very strange way we encountered in the women's movement. Where, when you're saying that let's be free of all this, whatever, you live your life like a full person yourself. There were many people who had been, who felt insecure to take responsibility for themselves. And so we would have some women say, I don't want that freedom. And, I'm fine. I know that I get beaten up every once in a while. I will take it. But I don't want that freedom because I can't deal with it. Right? So people make the choice of being unfree. And it's not unknown. And is it okay? It's up to each person to say whether it's okay or not. I mean, I have my problems with it in the sense that I think a lot of this has to do with conditioning. And the person who really wants to do that work with you will be as happy to work at 10,000 as at 5,000. So it's not like they're doing it because, out of the goodness of their heart and they're so excited by this work that they're doing that they want to do it only at 5,000. So the onus is on a person who's saying, I want to employ people so that I can produce something which I am interested in and on which I will make a profit which I will not be sharing with anyone. That will be mine. If I am good and kind, I may say, okay, now that I've got this, I'll pay you up to the minimum wage. Or I may not, because that is the contract. So this, and a lot of these rules have come in because we live in a state of glut. We've created a kind of economy where large numbers of people cannot find themselves jobs. And so they will take whatever comes to them. So you want to protect them, and that's the reason you do it. You are talking about that one person who may want really to be exploited and say, this is not exploitation. I love being in this condition of subservience. But when you make a rule out of that, so for every rule there is an exception. To make the exception the rule, especially in something like this, where it is not as if people don't have exploitative tendencies. It is not as if in the free market people don't want to squeeze the last bit of penny and carry it back to their bank balances. It is not like we live in a world where we say, okay, I see so many people around me who are in terrible conditions and my job is to make sure that they rise as I rise. We don't have that world. So to say, why can't I let somebody say that they just want to come and work for me and not see it as exploitation, and to treat it as consent, another completely, abused term, where I have all the power, you have nothing, and I come to you and say, I'm also a good guy, I don't have very much, why don't you take only a little bit instead of more? And then call it consent when you know that they actually have no choice. To say that, okay, I have somebody working, at least I'll get this, let me take it and go. It's exactly that they are trying to prevent. That you shouldn't be placed in a situation where exploitation becomes normal. So I'm not able to see that, if I look at it only, if I were going to run a business and I don't want any fetters, then actually if the world were a much more equal place, maybe so many fetters wouldn't be needed. It's an extremely unequal world we're living in. And when I say unequal, it's not just about having money or not having. You used the word power a few times when you said, if you were in power or if you knew someone close to power. I think that's the concept of power is the fundamental problem. When you have power, you act like you are beyond the law and everybody else is bound by what you say. If you say authority, it is authority given by something. So we give you the authority to perform certain functions, but you don't have the power to do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And so I actually reject the concept of power when it comes to the state. The state has no power. The state has a responsibility to act, it has an obligation to act within the law. And to an extent, I value the law to this extent that it is at least an open declaration of what it is that they intend to do. And there are huge problems even within that. And if they say, I'm in a state of exception and as the state, I don't need to follow the law, then you're not going to, we're in a bad place. And that's where the idea of the rule of law breaks down. The rule of law is not about having a danda in the law and going and beating people up. The rule of law is saying that those who have too much, whether it is resources, whether it is power, whether it's whatever else, that they will be contained by this. And that containment is gone in this free market libertarian thing. They're saying throw everything out. And as you can see, it's very difficult for me to agree with that. The other thing is that, you were talking about people saying it's okay, at least I get this, I'm doing it. We saw this in Shivakashi when you had the thing on child labor. If any inspector, anybody were coming, like we went as a team from the Supreme Court, and when we reached there, you could see people running away through the back, the rear door, and running, children, women running away because they didn't want to get caught. They were told that if you get caught, you'll never be able to work here. And for them, that's the only thing that they had. So, willingly they ran. They supported the employer because that's all they have.
Yeah.
But it was exploitative. It was, children would grow, by the time they're 30, their eyes will be gone. They'll be breathing this in the carpet manufacturing thing. In this, here we saw that they were breathing in that, what you use in the tip of the matchstick. And you find that,
sulfur.
So you're constantly, they said, okay, they can only work. Supreme Court gives an order saying they can work only in the packaging unit then. So you're constantly compromising on what is okay for people and what's not. And the childhood of the child was completely gone. So then, because it was beginning to be questioned, the match manufacturers started saying, we'll have schools for them where they will work here and then we'll take them to the school. So, it's these compromises that destroy generations of people. And I think we need to acknowledge that. for me, the most heartening thing and also the most depressing thing has been when all these juggy demolitions would happen. Everywhere you go, they would do it in February. March is the exam time. And if there is one thing everybody felt through the years, it was that if my child can only, I don't want my child to be where I am. And if the child can finish school and if they can study a little bit more, then the next generation will not be where I am. So when you go there to destroy that home at the time that they have their exams, you're actually not just destroying the home, you're destroying every dream that they've had. And the amount of investment that they make in making sure that the child is in a better place. I had a student who was from the slums in Nizamuddin, and I couldn't believe it because she was, really well turned out, well spoken, well read. Then I was asking her, I said, how come? And she said, my mother and my sister were very clear. My father is he is a rag picker, so he would do his job. And my mother and my sister were like, you do whatever you have to do. We will make sure, we will find the resources, but you study. And so she had finished her graduation and she was doing a, postgraduate diploma in something, which is where I was teaching her. You wouldn't think to look at her that she's anything, but that's the effort that they are willing to make. And we don't seem to value that effort. We don't seem to understand what it means for these families when you talk about libertarian and for the state to keep away from businesses, I'm talking about the state not destroying people's lives and letting them live it. We should be asking for that. The state shouldn't be, breaking down people's homes. It shouldn't be picking people up saying you're poor and putting them into beggars' homes. It shouldn't, look at the amount of decriminalization. You're talking about liberalization. About libertarianism and how the state should keep off. They have decriminalized so much when it comes to, corporate activity. How much decriminalization has happened for people in conditions of poverty? To remove one anti-beggary law, we are saying just 4 things. We are saying don't criminalize poverty. Don't bring custodialization for people in conditions of poverty. Yeah. Don't bring in the police because they have nothing to do with dealing with poverty. Don't bring in the judiciary because it becomes a restraint. Now find a way how you can deal with people who are in these various conditions of poverty. And no, you continue to have a criminalizing beggary law, anti-beggary law. It's, fundamentally there is something wrong with our way of thinking.
Yeah.
And when I hear the libertarian argument and I'm thinking, you're still thinking only about yourself. Someday will you stop saying, if it is good for me, it's good for everybody, and start saying, if it's good for you, let me see if it's good for me. When will that come? The day should dawn someday, no?
Yeah, I hear the critic. On things like anti-beggary, you will hear, it's the broad conception of state interference, is something like only if there is a victim should the state even show up to prevent the crime, right? Like, for example, the libertarian type will feel it very strange if smoking marijuana is a crime, which it is in India. Which is so strange because who is the victim here? It is the person who's making a decision to smoke marijuana by themselves. It's a victimless crime. Those are not in the realm of things that are crimes. It's a really strange state that wakes up in the morning and wonders if what you're doing is smoking a plant. That's completely up to you. And so with things like begging, who is the victim here? There is no victim, right? This is a person who given the sheer Hobbesian state of the world, has found themselves in a country, in a state, in a system that forces them to no other solution but to seek arms. And on the other side is somebody who's not being compelled to give them arms. This is somebody who of their own volition is parting with part of their money for this person because they feel that's the right thing to do. Why is the state part of this transaction? Right?
Actually, it's not just happening. It's people complaining that this is a nuisance. Actually, anti-beggary laws are anti-nuisance laws. So it's a class offense and it is a status offense. So these are status offenders. By being poor, by being on the street, you're already an offender. And then if you put your hand out and say, I'm hungry, and you ask for something, then actually it was very interesting. Delhi High Court. Delhi High Court had a very interesting judgment in 2007. One of those very rare cases where a person was convicted in a beggar's court and then there was an appeal actually to the High Court. It doesn't usually happen because they don't have the wherewithal. So in the Delhi High Court, first of all, the judge castigated the lower court judge for calling them, for things like their claws and their paws, and talking about them, kind of brutalizing them before you can speak about them. So he was really furious with that. And then he said, what is this logic where if I say that I'm working for persons in beggary and therefore I'm collecting donations, I'm okay. But if I'm a hungry person and I put my hand out and say, I'm hungry, can you give me something? That's not okay. Because our own class of people, now his thing is finished. I'm just saying, our own class of people, when we are kind, charitable, we collect donations from different people so that we can take care of those who are, those who are in poverty or whatever. Then we are good people. We can't be punished for that. But if I'm hungry, then you're a threat. So while it is done as nuisance law, one of the long-running cases in the Delhi High Court on this anti-beggary law started with a lawyer who went to the court and went to the bar association first and then to the court and then said that a beggar in a blue lungi, a leper in a blue lungi was threatening to touch her if she did not give some alms. And she said this kind of thing should not be permitted. There is an anti-beggary legislation. Why is this being permitted? This is how we, think about persons in poverty. So then she was given a whole set of photographs of various people and said, can you please identify who the person is? She said, I'm not going to get involved in this. That irresponsibility is something that is permitted to people who are complaining about people in beggary. But we wouldn't have that same compassion when it comes to persons in beggary. Who do we need that compassion for in this?
Yeah. Absolutely. And the level at which I want to disagree with you is not this level, right? Here I'm granting this as obvious fact. I could try, I'll attempt to, but really I'm not interested in that, because also selfishly the point of the podcast is for me to bring my own thinking to new ideas. And so I'm not particularly interested with pushing back on whether...
Sure.
I grant that the state has no business in thinking about, the question of beggary.
It's not the state. It is the individual asking for it. It's the individual who doesn't see themselves as ever being in that place, saying,
Correct.
Oh my God, I can't deal
and
with
so,
it.
sure, that's the thing. Now, imagine, okay, in a libertarian world, when this individual goes to the state and says that, look, I feel so slighted by the fact that a leper is sitting and I
feel threatened. The person is dangerous.
Correct.
She was not saying that this is just
Correct.
She was saying he's dangerous to me.
The
state is supposed to deal with danger, no?
Yeah, the state should respond to conditions of harm. That's absolutely true. But the way the anti-beggary law has been drafted has nothing to do with harm as the premise. Like, they're not saying that, see, if they came at this from a public health standpoint, that we're concerned that this could be an epidemic of leprosy, right? It's a very separate question. And we would have seen that in the language of the anti-beggary law. That's clearly not what you're saying.
We actually had a leprosy act which we repealed because it was rubbish.
Yeah, but what you're saying is it's an anti-nuisance law. Nuisance is not harm. Right?
It's anti-nuisance law. It's also vagrancy.
Correct.
And our idea that the poor are malingerers. That's why Shankarji's thing was so important.
Yeah.
Where he said if actually the poor were actually malingerers, they wouldn't survive at all to any point. You can't afford to be a malingerer when you're poor.
Correct. And so what the state would say in this libertarian conception of a state would be that, hey, I can't help you. They would just say that, look, I don't have in my ability the route to passing an anti-beggary law because it's simply not in my constitution to do this. Like, imagine if the Indian state tomorrow were to say that we want to chop off the heads of every Muslim in the country, right? It would not be allowed because there's no mechanism by which they can do that. It's simply not part of the constitution of the institution of the state, right? And I'm saying we want to remove more things from that constitution of the institution of the state such that when a citizen like this goes and says, I'm threatened by whatever, at least the modern form of the anti-beggary law, the state says it's something I simply cannot do. It's not possible, right? It's in the limiting of the ambit of the state that the answer lies. And so I just want to extend this a little bit because I think that's where we're going to go next. We're thinking about positive rights, right? So I delineated this in my note to you, but the Hayekian view would be something like you have negative rights, which are I have myself, my ability to move around, my ability to contract, to speak. And then the liberal state will say that I will defend your right because you already have it. I'm not granting you this right. It is to be with rights, these rights. And then you have the Indian Constitution especially has a lot of, within the fundamental right framework, a lot of positive rights. And these are core to the structure of the Constitution. Things like, and I spoke to you about words like right to livelihood, dignity,
Right.
Rights like food, healthcare, education, things like this. These are not things that I have. It's not like I'm holding these and I want the state to defend my ability to continue to hold them. I'm saying the state has to build the apparatus to deliver this to me. It has to bring it to me, right? And so in that positive right framework world, you inevitably end up with a really big state. It's the state that can pass an anti-beggary law. Because the question of beggary and the poor has now become something that the state has to solve. You've placed the onus on them saying that, look, if somebody is poor, then you have to solve it. We should give them the power now to legislate upon poor people something or the other. This big central state will pass a law. At which point then, what you're saying is right. The people who will show up at the door of the state is not the poor person. It is that woman who will say, I'm slighted, I'm offended by.
Correct.
And if those are the only voices they hear, those are the voices that vote for them, those are the vote banks that make them the powers that be, then of course they'll be incentivized to do it this way. So the critique is that if you create positive rights and you place these positive rights in the domain of the state, and the state is then inevitably a large state, high capacity state, then the will to power means that you just end up with an anti-beggary law. It's really hard. In fact, I would flip the question. You asked me, where do we see libertarian states? I said we don't. I'll flip the question. I'll ask you, where do you see this conception of a state that is truly powerful, large, etc., but does not have the influence of it being corrupt and also has a non-uniform code? Right? Like I can think about Denmark. Denmark is reasonably capitalist. But it's a monolithic Catholic state like that. It's a very small population. Where does it exist that you have this call to power, this large state, but it does not get corrupted by the powers, the louder voices? And so the libertarian answer is actually we don't want to play this game. Instead, cut the state's arms and legs off and have them do just the activity of that core liberal task really well. And otherwise, let's leave it to society to solve this problem. Now, it really is a problem. Now, the second part here would be, I'm sorry, I know I'm giving you two, three things.
I just feel that this part of what you said, I would go back to Henry Main's thing. See, it's a question of when they are saying stop this. They are saying stop acting at a time when these inequalities have been, and it's just not just inequalities of income or of wealth. It is inequalities which have been produced by these systems that have been set in place over decades and, longer than decades.
Absolutely.
So at that point to say, now stop, get off, will mean that we will continue, we will start this. It's not an equal place where we are. And we'll say that, okay, we'll do whatever we need to do. They can do whatever they want. Everyone doesn't have the same ability because actually, if we were say like Brazil, where we had 7% of the population which needs the support of the state is different. Here we have, by the admission of the state today, 80 crore people needing basic food from the state. At that time to say that we are going to drop everything and whoever is wherever they are, we'll start from there. I think we need to dismember a few of these.
Got it. This is a very good criticism.
Yeah.
In my own thinking, I call this gradualism, where the libertarians' point of view is something like gradually the market will fix everything.
Yeah. But also, one thing I want to say that the poor are not asking, persons in different conditions of poverty are not asking for state intervention all the time. They ask for state intervention only when the state intervenes already to make it worse for them than they are. Otherwise, the only time where I can think that they've asked two occasions, and both have to do with caste. And, caste is such a difficult thing for us to navigate here. One is the Atrocities Act, the Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes Atrocities Act, where they've been asking that certain things need to be put in. And the second thing is in manual scavenging, because we refuse to acknowledge that we have manual scavenging. I mean, you won't believe it. The case is going on in the Supreme Court. And one of the judges was, it went through many, many benches of the court. One of the judges actually asked, we don't have this in this country anymore, do we?
Shocking.
So when we are so oblivious, then, and if you did not have something like, say, manual scavenging in entering the manhole and cleaning the manhole, the number of people who are dying in that, the community has been saying, don't kill us, stop killing us. That is their, motto. But what you have the courts also, which is training itself to do something at least, because it, every institution needs legitimacy. And you can't have a thing like this happening, which is so blatantly wrong.
Yeah.
So then they say, okay, give 10 lakhs to them if they die. Give them 30 lakhs if they die. So the community says that, it helps us when you give us this, but it helps us even more if you stop killing us. Can you please introduce technology or whatever the thing it is, so that you're not going to push us into these places? So in some of these, they've asked for the legislation because if for nothing else, for openly acknowledging that this is happening and that it is unacceptable that it happened. So it's that's why I'm saying it's a question of at what point, who's asking for it. The poor have very, very, very rarely asked for a law. In fact, they are saying when we settle in these places, you say that we are on public land. Are we not the public? Where is our land? If we can't be here, where is our land? In one of the cases, the Bombay High Court some years ago, the judge says, oh, well, if you can't find anything here, I believe there's a lot of place in Buckingham Palace, so swim to Buckingham Palace and stay there. That's the level of callousness when it comes to this. That is the point at which you're saying, drop the role of the state. The state, in fact, it is the libertarians who are constantly talking to the state, not the persons in various conditions of poverty.
Yeah.
The people who are negotiating on their behalf say, be answerable. Give the right to information. That's the kind of thing that they're asking for. So I think we really need to see that, this is not something where, the persons in poverty are saying, please state come in. In fact, they want to live in a twilight zone because they are already in a twilight zone of legality and illegality. Just don't make them illegal all the time. They are actually asking for some of these laws to be removed so that this power doesn't exist with the state. So I really think the libertarians need to look again and see who's asking for the state to do and not do things.
Absolutely. So in my critique, I call this, so with any of my libertarian guests, I will push back with exactly this and say that, the markets are gradual, right? So what you said is right. If you drop everything as of today morning, then the way things are, having already been broken by systems that the state has created across 75 years of Indian rule and then whatever came before that, including caste being quite central to the whole problem, doesn't just disappear. And I do believe that over time a market will correct for this. But that's a generational problem. And for people alive today, it's little respite to say that, hey, it's going to be solved. Just wait for 100 years and we'll have it solved. Fair enough.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
And so maybe the answer would be to say that, look, like you said, Deepak, I agree that ultimately what we want to get to is this libertarian conception of a state if we were able to get the ground conditions right. And so to manage the gradual shift from here to there, right, we're happy to think about how to structure policy that undoes. So one is in large part deregulate so that any of the shackles that exist are removed. And for anything that the shackles have immediately created that can be managed, we will think about like a transition plan. But the language is still one of that liberalism. If you want to be on the same page as a libertarian and you both say that, then you're probably on the same page. You all will be holding the same placards, fighting the same fight. Yeah. No, but my feeling is that you're not saying that.
Because the purpose is different.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. My feeling is you're not saying that.
Yeah.
So the fact that it's gradual is a meaningful criticism of the libertarian position. But it's, if I were to solve that problem, that nonetheless does not bring you both on the same page.
No.
Right? Yeah. And to me, that is the question of positive rights. Right? I really feel like that's one of the big things that you all will disagree on, right? I can understand the impetus. Like, again, wearing the libertarian hat, I can understand the impetus behind even education is like what you asked earlier, which is what is education for somebody in Kanyakumari may not be somebody who's in a tribal, may not be somebody who's in urban Delhi, right?
Yeah, but all of them have an interest.
Yeah, have an interest, absolutely.
They have an interest in the world. They have an interest in seeing things that other people are seeing. They have an interest in growing as people. Everybody has an interest in that. It's just that not everyone has the, they don't see where it's coming from and they don't know where to go for it. But they don't want to lose themselves in the process of getting it. Yeah.
But for me, healthcare is the bigger one, actually. It's because no human body is different wherever you are, right? You're about the same and you suffer the same way and you have the same, ills. And so I can understand the impetus behind that fundamental right to being reasonably healthy. The difficult part, again, this is, I think, one of the most deep disagreements when you and the libertarian type. And I don't know why I've spent 2.5 hours on the libertarian type, but I feel, I want to keep wearing this hat because if I try to wear like the right-wing hat or the very statist hat, there's really not much to be done here. I feel like I have to concede all that ground very quickly. This is where I think the meat of the...
It's challenging for me because I've butted my head against libertarians all my life.
Yeah,
so it's
amazing.
Kind of interesting to...
Amazing. Yeah, okay. So they would say two things. One, that all of these problems are better solved by the market than they are solved by the state, even in a
Okay,
broken
where
market.
do they get it from?
Yeah, exactly. So this is
Where do they
the
get
hard
it
question,
from?
right?
Yeah.
If you think about the healthcare question, okay, maybe I'll start at the current baseline. You and I will agree that the current baseline for healthcare for almost all Indians is just horrible. It's terrible. We've had 75 years of the Indian state attempting to solve healthcare for Indians and clearly failing. Every political party that's ever come into power as part of the manifesto has spoken about healthcare. This is not a right-left issue. It's nothing. Every single political party says that we care about healthcare. And it's gotten us absolutely nowhere. The average poor person has meaningfully no real access. I mean, outside AIIMS here in Delhi, there is, if you look at the footpath, it's just, people who have their patients inside who are just sleeping and camping outdoors, right? This is the condition. Okay. And now the entrepreneurial libertarian type will ask, and this is why the profit motive is so important, right? Like I know that famously Nehru said to J.R.D. Tata, don't speak to me of profit. Profit is a dirty word. But they will actually hold that the profit motive is what has driven so many countries in other parts of the world to reach good healthcare solutions, because that incentive for the entrepreneur to become rich, although they becomes richer than everybody else, means that the provision, the ultimate provision, is truly valuable because no one is going to part with their money.
Is that true in Cuba? And they are considered to have the best healthcare system in the world.
Yeah. So I don't know. I should read more about the Cuban healthcare system.
Yeah.
I don't know. The broad argument would be, let's say that there are poor people somewhere. And I know that for certain they need access to healthcare. And I know nobody's solving this problem. That becomes an entrepreneur's problem. Like the next question is there a way for me to build a profit incentive into solving for this? There are two possible responses here. The first is yes. For the average cost of healthcare in India is markedly lower than the average cost of healthcare in the US or in most. I mean, I can walk into a random clinic and be able to get a service, walk to a medical shop and just buy generic medication. That's a boon that we have here in India, which is, it's not like the American state, the Indian state does not say that only you can manufacture a certain drug. We have the boon of having, which would be like the American version would be cronyism. Right? And the Indian version would be the lack of regulation. The Indian state has not regulated to protect. So that would be libertarians saying, great, that's a good way to structure the world. And even removing the shackles of who really is a doctor. Like, what is the definition of a doctor? These are all things that we think that people are good enough to decide by themselves. We don't need the Indian state centrally certifying every single thing that exists. A lot of certification could be privatized. That is, if you got a certificate from a private university somewhere, and I think the university is good in general, doctors from there are good, then I trust that you're a good doctor. We don't need the Indian state, like with the Jantar Mantar protests around NEET, for them to have a central control over certifying every single person. Am I able to set up a small clinic of some sort that provides access to these 50, 60 families and be able to build a really low cost insurance program? So the broad idea would be that we collect a very small fee for anybody to have access to the hospital, but we're able to start building averaging models, which is what most insurance does, around how frequently they will need access to healthcare. So I have the math around how many people are young, how many are older, so on and so forth. And really, a lot of this math works out to be not that much money. The reason I think this is true is because I've seen the data on the private education side. Almost all Indians today send their children to private preschool schools. Even in poor parts of the country, like Alex Tabarrok has done really interesting work on this, where he points out that if there is a government school nearby, that parent will still prefer to send their child to a private school nearby because the incentives are very different. The government school's incentive is to have a school. The private school incentive is to educate you, because if I don't do that, you'll not pay me next semester. So I'm really incentivized to keep that kid educated. And the parent knows this, right? And so, but I'm running into competition with the state. Healthcare is particularly expensive, and so when the state shows up with a government hospital, it's quite hard for a private player to compete with that government hospital. And I think that over time, you're able to see a free market deliver services. It'll start with somebody who's slightly poor and slowly work its way to other fringes. But business models will emerge that should solve for people who are poor. In case it doesn't solve for it, if you remember earlier, you mentioned that a lot of libertarians came and told you that let the government pay me, right, for
Correct.
these people. Don't build your own hospital. Is something that I would advocate for. Where I would say that if truly there is no way to access healthcare here, and you want to collect by way of taxation and spend some part of that tax revenue on healthcare as a problem, you know that the ability for that private player to be efficient is going to beat the ability for your government hospital to be efficient. One, we know that from all the government hospitals that exist, and two, from comparable. Like I gave the school example, any government school is going to be significantly worse than a similar private school because the incentives are different. it increases my incentive to set up a hospital there. I already have a rate card. I don't know if the person coming in is going to pay me with a voucher or pay me in Indian rupees. You may have got the voucher from the state, like an e-rupee or whatever, or you're paying me in rupees. So you can still spend money. But it at least sets up the private market in all those spaces. Now, over time, every subsequent government may decide to reduce that budget by a little bit as they realize that more and more people are escaping this trap of poverty. At which point then I'm earning in rupees as opposed to through the voucher rupee. But nonetheless, it has not impacted my earnings. And what you end up with 50 years from now is a fully privatized healthcare market where the state has not built its own infrastructure, has its own doctors, does its own drug procurement, all of those inefficient things at a much lower cost to the exchequer than it would be for it to set it up by itself. So this would be the libertarians' thinking. They would say that what we want to, ultimately, if we think 50 years from now, we want this whole thing to be a privatized market. If it isn't yet, how do we facilitate it getting there? And we want to trust that the entrepreneur has an incentive to build for something like this. So I'll pause here.
Yeah, okay. So there's 2-3 things. Before I come to health, we'll do education and why people don't go to government schools. And actually, if you go to places where there are government schools that are running well and where local communities get involved, people, who are working with schools to try and get modern techniques into them, take them to different places and show them things. Like, carrying a van which will take scientific experiments and do what they will. Or what Ekalavya was doing as an NGO, as an educational NGO in Madhya Pradesh, not the other Ekalavya schools, but where they were making education both relevant locally and taking science education in a way where, people would find it, children would find it easy to learn. See, the one thing about this country is we still continue to be a country where there are many first generation learners. Yeah. So they don't have all the help that, many other people have. So making it work for people making it work for people who are children who are coming from families where the family can't help, but and then you engage with the government school and help the government school kind of upgrade. This has actually worked, and it is still working in many places, despite the center taking away all kinds of funds and not, cracking down on all kinds of people who are doing all the good work in the country. Despite that, it is something that is working in many places. And I was witness to that in Chennai, for instance, where there are these group of people who are about 600 schools they have with them, and then they, each of those schools. So then it also has a ripple effect on how you can work, and it takes the burden off the parent from having to pay that kind of money. So I recently met somebody there who said, no, I've moved to a place a little, Neelangarai, a little far off, because that government school there is very good and I want my child to study 11th and 12th there. So it's not, it is not like it can't happen. What will make it happen is not this libertarian idea that you give, but actually people engaging with something that you think is a problem. If you think the solution to every problem is that I will put it in the free market and then, some good will come of it because there will be competition. Competition has not always worked very well. Competition has also worked in cartelization. Competition is also an antitrust issue. Competition is something which actually helps you undermine everybody else. So I'm not sure the answer lies there. The answer lies in a community that believes that certain things matter and will stretch itself out for it. They tried that each one teach one, but they brought in children who themselves didn't know very much. In legal aid, you had for the longest time, they were saying that all newcomers will do legal aid, which means that, people who don't have... Now, all that is changing slowly. It just needs to change much, much faster. And the libertarian view will prevent it from happening. Because you'll say, this is not what we need the market. So I really worry about this because you say government schools are not good, so let's abandon them and go on to something else. Why? There are ways of, you have the resource, you have the teachers, you have, buildings and structures. There's no reason to abandon them. The only reason that that's happening is because nobody has been paying attention. And because they don't have the profit motive, you believe that it's only the profit motive that'll make it work. What we've actually found in private schools, and many of them, is that when you have private schools, their interest is in retaining those people and getting the maximum fees that they can. You find every other day there are people going to the court because you're asking for such exorbitant fees that they can't afford to pay it. And their child can't get away in the 5th and 6th and 8th and 9th standard. So you're forced to pay. And then the court will have to come in and say, don't ask for so much fees, you can't demand. What is this? This is the idea of the private and the, and profit. So, in fact, a properly structured governmental school where people are involved. You see, the thing is, the middle class has largely pulled itself away from anything that they are not interested in. We are the only ones who have the ability to make the state function, and we are the only ones with spare time and spare resources which we can put into these, which means that I don't need to get paid if I have to go and help out in a school, if I have to, put a whole schedule of what can be done. I don't do it. If I don't do it and then I say, oh, well, it's about the state, it's not about the state. The idea of horizontality is something that was brought into human rights law. It is not just vertical. When we are talking about rights, we are not just talking about state and people. We are talking also about people and people. And if you really believe that the state should withdraw, then start doing the work so that the state doesn't have to come into all of this. The state has provided the schools, it's providing the resources. Now get it done, no? We don't want to engage with. It's like the third class and second class compartment on the train. It became two-tier AC, then it became first AC. Now you all fly, so there is no need to worry about whether the trains are good, bad or indifferent. That callousness is what is the problem. It's not about the state withdrawing.
And the libertarians' answer to that last example would be privatize the railways, right? Because they'll say the reason the flights are great, Air India under the
flights
state,
are not great, but that's a different story. Yeah,
it exactly matches how much you pay for it. Like for example, I flew to Delhi. I paid I think 5,500 rupees ish to fly.
Really, this time?
Yeah. It was I got a good deal.
Wow.
And a nice afternoon flight also. I didn't have to wake up early in the morning. And I was like, yeah, I mean, it's a big bird that goes in the sky, and it's a very complicated operation, and you have, tens of thousands of people who are involved in making this thing happen.
But actually, that's not true, because I've traveled by, Tamil Nadu Express for the longest time. So long as all of us were traveling by Tamil Nadu Express, it was a fine train. But, it's like in a very different context. In Hamburg, when I visited, I said, my God, these services are perfect. How is it happening? And they said all those retired women between the ages of 80 and 95 are, breathing down the neck of the state to make sure that this functions. And that's why it's functioning. That's the kind of role that we need to play. And we've abandoned that. We've said, okay, if I'm not traveling by the train, I don't care what happens to it. Tomorrow, if we stop traveling by the plane, even if there are, multiple accidents, we won't bother about it. That level of callousness is our problem. That we are not engaged with the world around us. We are only interested in abstracting what we can and then forgetting about the rest of it. And that's what keeps poverty.
I hear you. And I'm exploring this with you, right? So I'm also like thinking about, I'm building a structure as we're going. In my mind also, I'm feeling like a fort is being built as we're talking. One of the things that I feel is here as a contradictory sort of idea is, you mentioned this community showing up to take responsibility to be part of that school process.
If you really care, if you care that the world has to be a different place and you think this is not okay,
exactly.
And the libertarian is saying that too. They're saying, oh, this is not a good place. Let's do it by taking it to the market and making it a better place.
So their answer to like, the community may be able to solve this. And what the libertarian is saying is, here's another solution. The solution is, can the profit motive solve this? That is, can I bake into the design of the system a methodology by which it remains valuable. If you take planes it's a good example, because we know that the Indian state used to own an airlines, which it no longer does, but it never operated it even close to profitably. And if you look at the airlines industry as it stands today, you get flights for a fairly wide range of, and it's a monopolized industry. Like I think that Indigo owns, at least in India, Indigo owns almost all of the Indian market, and Akasa and a few other players in Air India have a little bit here and there. And despite it being a fairly monopolized market, you have what I would consider to be reasonable rates, right? I know that the Indian state, the aviation ministry does, have some price controls for airlines. But I feel like the control doesn't really come from the government. It comes from what people are willing to pay. They have to acknowledge that ultimately the average Indian is willing to pay so much to fly, and that's sort of as far as it goes. And because the profit incentive is baked in, there is no choice. If the toilets are dirty or the seats don't work, I simply won't pay you next time. And then you shut down as a business. And because that business owner has a profit incentive, that's what keeps so it's no longer a community thing. I'm not showing up at the airport saying the last time I flew it was terrible. Can we please fix this problem together? I'm just saying that if you don't do this, then too bad. Like you have a big loss here, and a big massive gain in case you do it really well. I think the what you're saying, correct. I mean, I'm not able to find a good workaround for this. Is the question of what happens to somebody who cannot pay at all, right? Like here, all of this.
Actually, even more than that, in this country, we can now see that they built all these airports in smaller places. Mm-hmm. They're not being used at all.
But the state did that. You see?
No, I know. Yeah. I'm saying that when we are thinking about the capacity to pay, They didn't do that. They're not. People are not traveling because it is the state. People are not traveling because they don't have the capacity to pay. So it's not as if everyone, if all of you are going, this is exactly my point. When this class of people travels anywhere, you have the ability to raise your voice and ask for what you want. When you abandon spaces, then you are basically saying to hell with it, let me just take care of myself. And I'm saying when the libertarian says that all that has been so abandoned, just open it up so that if they can, let them come and get it from us or not. I'm saying that's not the answer. The answer is actually caring about what is happening with all these other communities. And I just want to give one little episode which I found fascinating. Dalai Lama was invited to Europe, where he was introduced to young children who had lost, their arms, their legs, so prosthetics. And then you have a girl who's not able to travel to school because she's got some kind of problem. So she's got this technology that will, even to go for a picnic, it's like she can virtually be on the picnic with her friends. It was beautiful. And they had used this they had produced all these technologies, and they, one by one, he met those children. And he's a lovely man. So he really made the whole thing appear, gave it that aura that it deserved. At the end of that, the people who had called him and organized this asked him, can you say a few words about what you've seen and what you think? And he said, I think it's fantastic that you're working on all this, that you're caring about children, that you're, producing all this for them. But he said, I do want you all also to remember that you can never produce for the whole world. So you cannot take these, in Africa, he spoke only about Africa, but, say, Afghanistan, where you had people losing all those legs and whatnot, and children in many parts of the world who are completely without the wherewithal to, and you can't make so many that it will reach everybody. He said, but there is one thing that can go around, and it can go all around the world, and it costs nothing. And that's compassion. And I think somewhere in the libertarian argument, there is so much about what I can do and get, and, I am great and I will produce and I am going to do this, that they are forgetting that there are many other ways of achieving things which will be far more equitable, far more humane, and far more inclusive. You treat people now as customers all the time. You don't treat people like human beings anymore, no? And that's a huge problem when it comes to poverty and persons in various conditions of poverty. It's both the disconcern, if I can call it that. I don't know, like dispassion, disconcern. And it's also a kind of sense that, if you're there, it is because you deserve to be there. And I will provide all this. And if you're not able to reach it, it means that you are not worth it. You're not worth what I'm producing. And that's really, really, really a problem.
Yeah. I think the first bit of what you said is absolutely true. I think the average libertarian views the world as a collection of transactions. Of course, you have personal relationships and all of those things. But that idea that these are...
No, they are not bad people. I'm not saying that.
Fair enough.
I'm saying that way of thinking narrows this down so much.
Yeah.
Like there is no other way.
When I made this argument to somebody on the libertarian side, I remember they pointed out something to me about... the libertarians' answer to a lot of poverty questions is philanthropy. It really is how they sort of push back on a lot of these questions.
Yeah, it's the worst kind of answer.
And they ask the question, which countries have the most philanthropy? Like, think meaningfully about people who give their money away. Who's giving away most of their wealth? And the answer would be the United States, the United Kingdom, like the UK. It's the billionaires and trillionaires and the multimillionaires in these countries who give away most of their wealth on as much philanthropic, as many philanthropic missions as possible.
Every tech fellow, every big tech person will set up a philanthropy.
Yeah.
And they'll be, saying that this is the great good we are doing. They dictate to us what is good for us. They could be completely wrong. I mean, Bill Gates getting into education and making a complete mess of it. We've heard enough of all of that. But it also gives them control over our lives. So philanthropy doesn't come without strings attached. And philanthropy, because they've made so much money that they can put it into a philanthropy, they actually think they know the answers to all the problems of the world. And if that is not the answer to the problem of the world, you please rewrite your problem.
But now you have to... I'm saying that you can take the money from the rich, because ultimately to do all the things that we want the state to do to solve the conditions of poverty, the state has to do it. Okay. How do we finance the solutions?
Actually, this is the thing. See, we all actually have a lot. I'm saying first we have to rethink what we think we want our world to be. If we want our world to be something that will make my life better and I get more and more and more, then we will think about the world in one way. If we think that we live in a world among people, then the way we think about it will be different. If we think that we have perhaps cornered much more than we should have, and that has deprived many other people of things, it is not a kindness that you do. It is, and you never do anything for people unless they want it. So you make an offering. In the beggary thing, that's what we said. We said, listen, you can't have control over the lives of those who are in poverty because you pushed them there in the first place. So now you offer to them, if you think that, a skill will be a good thing that will help them move out of it, if you're able to convince them that that's what they should be doing, they may be willing to come and learn the skill.
Right. You'll
have people say, these beggars, I offered a job to them and they did not come. They actually don't want jobs. They are happy being malingerers. And then I'm saying, how many assaults to their dignity have they taken in their lives in just keeping alive? And you think that your offer of this will suddenly make them feel that everybody, that there is this guardian angel who's come and who's going to protect them. What is the trust that you've got from them in all this time? Nothing. You didn't bother to build trust. You just think that your goodness should be recognized by them because they are the people in need.
But
this
who's you?
way of thinking about people. See, nothing in our earlier in our education we used to have, which I'm really grateful for. We used to have things where we were taken out, we met people. It only happened to me in college.
Yeah.
But and it was not only to persons in sociology. Anybody who wanted it could join that. We would go to a village every weekend. And I keep saying, I went to that village, we were supposed to teach them nutrition and this and that. I didn't know anything. But I know I came back having learnt a hell of a lot. The way people cope with their lives, and sometimes it really makes you wonder, how do people in such difficult circumstances still manage to make something of their lives? And when you go and see it, you learn respect. But I don't think, and I'm not romanticizing it. There are all kinds of people everywhere, but there is a certain romance to the way in which people who don't have managed their lives. When in Coimbatore, I remember my aunt telling me that every morning, the woman who'd work at home would come spotlessly clean with flowers in her hair. You see that, you go to Chennai today, all those who are sweeping on the streets, they're just perfectly turned out. And I'll be scraggly going for my walk in the morning and they'll already be... And she said, they have much more to imagine what their lives will become than you and I do. They are living that imagination because... they're trying to reach that imagination. So these are not people without thoughts and ideas. And if you have the ability to be equal and to, and learn it, not if you have to learn it. That bit of, which is why I keep coming back to humanity. It's not about caring for people like, I am this good person and, this is the charity I'm going to do. It's the worst way to treat people. But if you can see that the world around you is the world in which you live, and therefore, you need to know your world and you need to know what you should be doing in this world. Then make that effort.
I hear you. Okay, so I'm going to, I think this may be the last bit that we're able to cover. I'm going to say that, let's say we live in that world, okay? Which why do we not? Why do we not live in a world where we think about the world as a world where everybody lives, as opposed to a world where I live and coincidentally everybody else is around? If we grant that, right?
I think, just to say this, that I think part of the reason is what you said right in the beginning, that ladder, casting the ladder off. I think there is a little bit of that, where you feel that if everybody becomes equally able, then what is special about your ability? And, will you then slide down on some scale? And that's it's an anxiety that sometimes prevents. I think people feel like, no, let it be like this. The status quo works for me. Why should I change it?
Yeah. And there's also a deeply human anxiety because this idea of being in a tribe, the other, having to be better than the other at all times.
I don't know why we've created that. That's very much a liberalization thing. When I think about students in the 60s, 70s and part of the 80s, and then I think of 80s, 90s, it's pathetic what we've become, because in school and in college we were taught that growing up is the thing. You learn in the process of growing up. We were bad students, good students, whatever, and then when we passed out, we all, we had learned how to learn, And that was it. So that, in school you did a lot of rote learning, but you also tried and drew. If I drew a hand, it would look like the moon. I mean, whatever I did, you could never recognize it for what it was. But they put us through all of that and said, let's find out who has what. It was uncomplicated. And now we've made it like you need to know many things and therefore people are knowing nothing. It's really unfair what we are doing to kids.
Yeah.
And that's the growing up we are seeing. So it is not, the growing up today is not about reaching out. That's not the training that's being given. But I must say this, that many of the young people I meet are reaching out and looking at the world around. Many, it's just amazing. And I think if you leave them free to be that, the world will really be a better place. Because that idea of self-interest is not what is driving many people. Which is why I come back to the Gen Z protest. They were not just in it for themselves. They said this is wrong and they were there. So that idea that it doesn't have to affect me personally, for me to think that something is wrong and to be there, to say that if Sonam Wangchuk is going to get picked up like that and taken away, it is not right and I'm going to be there to say it, is a very big thing.
Yeah.
To say that if people are getting beaten up, I can't keep quiet while that is happening. This is the first time in a public space in a long time. See, people have worked for other people. When policies go wrong, there are protests. I mean, people work among them. But this is the first time I've seen people completely unconnected with anything coming together because they saw something is wrong. And I'm not just talking about the education policy. It was also about nobody should be bundled out. How can you take that man out like that? How can you beat people up like this? And they came after that. What was meant to be a threat to deter them actually brought more people. That idea, the detail of it you can see wherever. But the idea that what happens to somebody else matters to me. That idea is the only idea that can actually produce some kind of change in this. If I'm going to be, if this, liberalization's idea that each to their own and I'm going to get the maximum that I can out of it is going to be the dominant philosophy, then I don't think we're going to get neither will people who are espousing this philosophy get very far, nor will anybody else.
Yeah. No, I hear you. But it is a straw man. I don't think they're saying that I don't care about what happens to somebody else.
No, they're saying I care and therefore you leave them to their own devices so that they'll come to me.
Or anybody they so choose to. Right? Like to steelman that idea.
And my kind, whatever, who is going to be producing all this. See, there is something that really needs to be thrashed out in this.
Yeah, but I mean, if let's say that.
And I'll also say this, that many of the libertarians I know are actually, as people, good people. So it's not like they're bad people. I just worry about their, ideology on this. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, to steelman that position, I think broadly what they are, it comes from this deep sense of you don't get to tell me what to do. Because that produces in me this like strong negative reaction to some sort of coercion. And then the leap that everybody's like me. So that person there will also feel the strong negative reaction if someone were to coerce them into any sort of a decision.
No, they do feel that. The persons in poverty do feel. But what are the kind of decisions you're pushing on them? You're asking them to clear their houses out and just,
No, and no libertarian will stand by that. No, like there you have their agreement. I think what it's the limits placed on people's ability to conduct commerce in a free market that the libertarian will disagree with you on.
Yeah.
Right. And so there they're saying that
because they're making commerce a dominant thing, and I'm saying no, it's not.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this was such a valuable conversation because I was able to hear that side, for everything I was trying to steelman on this side, I was able to hear the counter argument. Okay, so the last bit I wanted to cover was in this universe, like let's say that we have a more compassionate people and then by extension a more compassionate state.
I again want to say, when I say compassionate, I don't expect every individual to be compassionate. I'm saying there are norms that dominate at different points. And in the idea of the self dominated and self-interest has dominated for far too long. I think it's time to replace it with something else.
Yeah. In this framework, right? Now let's go back to the beggary question, right? It is true that, I mean, even if I were to snap my finger and we were to be able to live in a significantly more compassionate, warm world where we do think about a world as a place for people as opposed to for myself, there will be people who are today poor under this system and the way the current state is in. sure, we were able to repeal the anti-beggary laws. All of the shackles holding poor people in place, some of these laws that you've written about, we're able to repeal them. Then the question becomes, how do we correct for these mistakes, right? And on all the positive right questions, this is the question. How do we correct for the lack of education? How do we correct for the lack of healthcare? How do we correct for this? And please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm hearing what you're saying is that we still need some sort of a state-like body. This may happen at a federalized level, at a municipality level, at a town level, at a state level, or centrally. But we still need some sort of a common state-like body that shows up to be able to address the needs of some section of the people who are poor, to solve those inequities, one that have already been produced by the state prior, and two, any inequities that result from just being in a condition of poverty. Is this correct? Like, is this, or are you saying that it's a society problem, that people have to solve this problem?
No, it's not that. See, I'll tell you, I'll give you a slightly different example. There are a lot of missing children. Okay? So we found that one child went missing in our vicinity, and then when we kept looking, and then finally we found that near the railway station, there's an old man who sees these vagrant children and then picks them up and keeps them there till they get, but he doesn't go to the police because the police will then give him a hard time. So he has his own networks of letting people know, and that's how we found him. Now, he under the law should have been registered and should have told the government, and I can understand to an extent why that could be important, because, anybody could then pick up children and keep them, whatever. Now, soon after this happened, we found what happened in Muzaffarpur, which the group went and, the TIS group went, and they went to all the homes in Bihar. And I think the principal secretary in Bihar was extraordinary in saying that we want all of these assessed and looked at. And in the Muzaffarpur house, they found, a building of, 4 floors, a window only on the top floor. That should have been enough to say that there's something wrong there. And they found children were being sent to, drugged and being sent to various kinds of people. The chap who was running that home, his wife was was in the government in some way, some municipal commissioner or a municipal councillor or something. And then they found that there were places where when the children were finished with, they were discarded in a dump and the bodies were pulled out of there. So when you regulated, this is what you got. So you find that state regulation, unless there is a strong incentive to do it, it doesn't seem to happen. And this is not the only time. Muzaffarpur was one, well-known case. But we've had, for instance, through the judiciary, we've found so many places where people are just put into these institutions, forgotten, abused. And the people who come out and say that it's happened get penalized for it because they'll lose their jobs, they'll have, get harassed, all of that. So the thing with this is that when you put too much authority even in an institution, in a whatever kind of form, to monitor, if it is not interested, then it will not care. And then whatever happens will happen. And institutions have this way of keeping people in their control. And this is a country which always says, children, we care about children. And then we allow children to be in these kind of institutions. So there's a way in which it's not just about whether a state does it, which is why I'm saying that, I remember another occasion wherein there was a news item which said that people somewhere in RK Puram in Delhi, they were complaining that there were screams coming from a building. And they said every night there are people screaming. And then they found that it was an interrogation center. It was an unofficial interrogation center there. And they were beating them up. How did the people respond to that? They said, either you relocate it or you have soundproof rooms.
Fantastic.
It didn't bother you that people were getting beaten up in these places and they should not be getting beaten up. So, which is why I'm saying we can put this question in any way we want. And in beggary, I've actually seen how Koshish, the group that works with, that's been working and that's raised many of these issues over the years. Now, they, for instance, have, deliberately they make films in areas where, and then people come, you talk to them, they say, see, people don't know what beggary is. So they see them as dangerous people, dirty people, we don't want them. When you introduce them to who these people are and humanize them, then the vicinity kind of changes. They stop being antagonistic to them and say that, acha, they also need something, it's okay, we'll see what it is that we can do. They are not they are not dangerous people who are out to attack us. I'm saying with this level, if you're going to be talking at this level of induced ignorance in a sense, then all our talking will be in vain. We can say whatever we want. So, which is why I'm saying I'm not talking about every person who has the wherewithal to become a good, kind human being and who'll go and do whatever. But the dominant way of thinking about this has to change. The dominant way of thinking today is that the poor are responsible for their poverty. The poor are dangerous because of their poverty, and it's not our business to worry about them because it's up to them to, raise themselves to whatever they want. And within the state, they're saying, okay, we are putting some money into your account. That's it. Now deal with your lives. There are no schools, no hospitals, no this, no that, no nothing, and no means for them to be able to do anything. One insurance will be given where you can go to some place, and that's it. So there's no engagement with this at all, and there is no change. And this is given like it is largesse. So the whole, and that's why I'm saying we can. I mean, I could keep saying, illustrating this with many more things, whatever. But if we don't do that fundamental thing of thinking differently, all this will be in vain. It's not about fundamentally changing ourselves and becoming suddenly good people and angelic. It's not what I'm talking about at all.
Yeah.
The idea of poverty as crime is so dominant today, and I think we need to accept that.
It really is. And
we need to acknowledge that.
It is extraordinarily strange. And that's why for a large part of this, I wasn't even trying to push back on saying that no, poverty should be crime. Because I could have done a disagrees on that level, but it really didn't feel like the place I wanted to intellectually engage with you. It felt more, and that's why I was trying to come back to the, yes, that's how the state is treating it.
It's not just the state. Let's be clear about
yes,
that too.
Society. Yeah. Okay, yes, all of us.
It doesn't suit us, therefore.
Correct. Now, but what you're saying is it's simply not sufficient to stop treating poverty as a crime. And it is not even sufficient that we feel meaningfully, compassionately about the condition that people who are poor go through, but that we want to make or take into action some means of reform to be able to help, because we would want to, right? Like inevitably, given that we have the compassion for those who are poor, we would like to do what we can to help them exit this circumstance. Let's say I'm with you.
That's one way. The other is also to say that help is one thing, but for us to be different people. See, as a community, I don't want to put the burden on an individual, but I really think that all the lessons that we learn, all the teaching that happens, is it done keeping in mind that if we go through school and college without ever having studied about what happens to people in poverty, when 80% of the country is like that, have we learnt anything? If I go through law school, for instance, and I only learn about organized labor, that's like 7% of the working classes. What have I learned? So I'm saying at every level, we need to change that. See, the changing thinking doesn't happen by just you and me talking one to the other, no? And it doesn't, I can be a very bad person. But if that's the dominant thinking, I still know what the thinking is. I may be a horrible person and may not want to help anybody else. But I know that that's not the dominant understanding of what the world is.
Yeah.
We need to change our understanding of what the world is. Then what we do in it comes next. But we don't even have that. We are not even moving in that direction. And in the past 30 years, we've been moving, in fact, far away from it. Where we are saying, leave everyone to their own devices, just get off, and we will now provide services and whatever. Let them come to us and take it. You don't even know who they are.
Yeah. I please excuse me
sorry.
The straw man is not that let them come to us and take it. Really, I feel like what I'm hearing through all of this, if I'm trying to steelman the libertarian side and doing my best, I'm trying my best to step into your shoes and see it from your eyes. It's not always possible, because learning a new way of looking at the world is a little bit of, I'll speak with you today, then I'll think about it for a week, and come up in a following podcast back and forth. But I think it's the difference between being passionate and dispassionate. That's what the distinction seems to be. That the libertarian type is, like you're saying, truly being dispassionate when they say that it's not as if I don't care for a poor person. That it's possible that I spend my entire life in service of people who are poor and education, and I do the best that I can. I'm raising money for them. All those things I'm doing for sure, right? It is that when it comes to thinking about the institution of the law and the institution of the state, it is a truly dispassionate institution. That's what libertarian would say. And
I just want to get in there, because it's not about passion and dispassion for me. In fact, it's all about dispassion, if anything. The thing is that if I open my eyes in the morning and think about what this world is, what is the thought that comes to my head? That I have, it's a complicated world where I have to go and make my mark somewhere, and then I have to earn something. And, in all of that thinking that I do, who all feature and what features? That has to change. So it's not about, I'm saying, these are all we are all conditioned to think in certain ways. And this is part of that conditioning. We have to decondition and know the world differently. What we do in that world comes after that. But so it's not about, libertarians not caring about the poor. I don't care about the, persons in poverty more than the libertarian does. It's got nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with just the individual. Of course, it has the individual in it, but it doesn't have just to do with the individual. It's the way of thinking. It's like, when we say giving the tribal communities a certain identity has taken, it's still not complete, but it's taken so long that when I think of all those popular films of the 60s and 70s and 80s and, even till recently, some of the documentaries that we've seen, where tribals are portrayed as some kind of between man and animal, no? So there's no understanding. And I'm saying that we don't even know we don't know. And how should we think about, the constitutional understanding is very interesting. It's not a flat thing, the constitution is not flat about human beings. So it says people who live in fifth schedule areas are people who require a different kind of, you have to acknowledge a different relationship to land. It is not land as property. It's a very different relationship. So you've actually in the constitution itself said that, listen, when we come to tribal communities, their relationship with land is different. Let's not equate it with ours. So you can't buy and sell land like you can. If I want to sell land in an urban area, I'll sell it. But in a tribal area, you won't allow that to happen. And the state intervenes only to make sure that nobody is cheating them because they don't understand what the commercial, like you said, the contract. I get a thing signed by you and then you say, but you gave it to me. So then you have to go through the state. The state acts like to protect the against duress and against cheating. That's it. That's their only role. Otherwise, the community will do what it will within that. So,
no, but this is exactly, so this is the infantilizing view, no? What you're saying is...
No, they're not saying you can't do it. They're just making sure, because when you go in from outside, you have different rules. You'll take it to your courtroom. They don't know about your courtroom. And you don't know about their practices. So you don't know anything about them either. You just know you want the land. And you know your court and your institution. So you say, okay, I'll get a thing signed and then I'm going to make it that. So the state says, okay, I'm going to make sure you come from outside. You're doing this. I just want to make, if they're doing it willingly, there's no problem. If they've understood what the consequences are, we won't get in the way. But if you are bamboozling them because you believe that they don't know these aspects of it, then we will raise questions.
Got it. So I don't know the specific, tribal case, but I think a lot about the land use regulations that farmers have around agricultural land versus non-agricultural land. And I see a similar challenge here where basically a lot of the land has been rendered completely worthless because there is no way to get a land use certificate changed for it to not be agricultural land. And those who want to buy, because over time the world changes, and when the world changes, the things that land can be used for changes. And so it's become conditional property. It's not even like I own the land and can absolutely sell it. It is that I own the land on the condition that I can sell it to somebody else who can only use it for a particular property. And
but that comes from a different place, that if you look at the land reforms in the 50s and 60s, the purpose of those land reforms was to increase productivity because we need food for the country. So, and since land is a limited commodity, you say that, and that's why they did away with tenant farmers, they did away with sharecropping, all of that, because you need them to have the incentive to invest fully in that land. It was a purely economic
but this is
and then that has continued. So then unthinkingly, some of these may continue. In some places, it may actually make sense.
Yeah.
For instance, if you look at the Land Acquisition Act that came in 2013, the idea that, you should not be converting for all these projects, you shouldn't take something that is good, productive agricultural land and take that and put it into some construction of something. So
even if the farmer owns it?
Even if the farmer owns it.
Then this is a misunderstanding of...
No. See, that's the thing. See, you want the state to think also for, if every farmer, like now you find that in many farming families, the next generation doesn't want to do farming.
Exactly.
But we can't afford to be without farming. So then the state has to figure out what kind of policy can we have It is complicated.
No,
so
sure,
if you say that everything can be sold and everything, you can build whatever you want on it, you build a factory on it, then you have to think about tomorrow when you tell the state to provide food, where will it get it from?
But we should never tell the state to provide food because...
You will not, because you and I will not. We'll get it from, get it imported from somewhere. There are many people, that's why I'm saying in this country today, we can't afford that. When you have the PDS, when you have, the state having to provision some of this, you can't just say that let's leave it to the market.
Yeah. And then the libertarian, again, I'm bringing on the libertarian to say that then basically what you've done is you've coerced the farmer. You've told the farmer that this is not really your land, because when we use words like if I have a bag, I can set it on fire, I can, eat the bag, I can do whatever, it's my bag. That word means something, it's so sacred.
That's because you believe in ownership and property the way you do.
Correct. Yeah.
If you do, then what you're saying is right. But when you consider that most of this country, people don't own anything, then the notion of property and ownership will change.
Mm-hmm. We've reached like 3 hours and didn't it go by so quickly? This was really amazing. So
I've enjoyed it.
I had 3 steps. Okay, somebody told me about talking to Usha. I know you don't like being called Dr. Usha. And when I heard about it, I was like, I should definitely reach out. And then there was we did a few video calls and we wrote back and forth.
Fun. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then all the way through the last, and you can ask all my friends. I've been talking to them quite a bit about, this is what happened.
Be careful, you'll lose your friends if you talk too much.
My friends are great.
Okay, you're luckier than I am.
Yeah, they're so excited to, and they're used to me being me. And then, I had a mental model of what I would like this conversation to be, because I came in with the explicit intention of, at the end of this, if somebody told me to sit in your chair and argue Usha's, case, I should be able to do a fantastic job, because I will have guests over the next coming months who will all be saying what I'm saying, and I would have to hold your position. And I really feel like I got as close to, I could. I mean, it's not possible to, over 3 hours, but as close to. So I'm very, very happy with, how this went. I don't know how it was for you.
I've enjoyed this. Anybody who's going to challenge me, because even as I speak, that's another reason I think we need the freedom to speak.
Yeah.
Because every time you speak, you commit yourself to an idea, which may then get uncommitted and become something else, but it moves. So this conversation has moved me from where I was.
Yeah. Nothing excites me more than changing my mind. Like to know that something I believed until yesterday was possibly wrong. Yes, that's the reason the whole podcast exists. Usha, I'm very, very grateful for you coming on. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. I've enjoyed this.
Likewise.